Hi everyone and welcome. I'm Alex Turner and I'll be taking you through our place pillar for the next 3 hours or so. Regeneration is all about connection, connecting homes to workplaces, the heritage of places to the future, the first phase to the final vision. And the purpose of place has become a critically important theme in the post-pandemic recovery. From how do we invest in our local communities, which became so important to us all, through to what are our city centres going to be for in the future. And the North has some great stories of reinvention and regeneration, which can help inspire the plans for the next generation. And we've got a great lineup of speakers to delve into these themes and many more. First, thanks to our sponsors, the Phoenix Group, TransPennine Express, Mott MacDonald and BECG for supporting the place pillar today. Do get in touch with the speakers and representatives today. They're all keen to work with you to really collectively improve the North. And so with my best Philip Schofield impression, here's what's coming up. Later on, we'll be hearing from transport experts, including Transport for the North and Manchester Airports Group, to analyse what our priorities are and to ask how do we get investment right in the long term. Oliver Steele from Mott MacDonald will set out why we need proper and effective placemaking in his response to the government's Levelling Up White Paper. That will be followed by Wayne Hemingway examining the role of towns as we focus on Morecambe and Calderdale to see what can be learned from their successes. At 12:20, we've got a great panel that includes Homes England and MJ Gleeson on housing delivery and overcoming the challenges that we face in that area. Then we will look at one of the outstanding regeneration projects in the country, the transformation of Eastlands in Manchester, which has taken us from the Commonwealth Games 20 years ago through Manchester City's revival and years of success, and we now look forward to the new arena, Co-op Live. We'll finish up our place pillar with a look at Therme Manchester, which will be the UK's first city-based wellbeing resort when it opens next year. But first and now, we'll hear from property entrepreneur George Downing. Over the last 2 decades, George has quietly built Downing Property Group into a major force in UK regeneration, with £2 billion worth of residential and mixed-use schemes completed, and a further £1 billion of development projects now being added to the portfolio. While Downing operates across the UK and has major projects in London and elsewhere, it is his company's track record in Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool and Newcastle that really stands out. I spoke with George earlier and started off by asking him about his largest and latest current project, First Street in Manchester, which is a co-living scheme based around a 45-storey tower designed by the Simpson Hough Partnership.
Well, first of all, Manchester's a great city to work in. It's a very well-run council. I know Sir Richard's just retired, and Sir Richard Leese, and you had Howard Bernstein when we first started in Manchester as the chief exec, and they were a great. They were great to work with. If when you went to see them with your plans, or you went to any of their team, any of the executive team, the planners, or Dave Roscoe, or whoever it was in the city, if they didn't like what you were doing, you were just told straight away, that's not good enough. It doesn't create enough jobs. And you'd have to think smartly and go back and represent things. And if they liked what you were doing, they were very supportive as well at the same time. So it was really very easy to work there. We'd done 2 or 3 schemes in Manchester very successfully. And I noticed the particular scheme it was quite a dense build to rent scheme. And I thought the scheme was okay, but I just felt as though it could be improved. And I think we've done that with the new scheme that we're building, that we got planning for. And it's really a mixture of residential types. So you've got co-living, which is the planners were sui generis, but we've also got a lot of apartments there to rent, and the right type of apartment to feel on the scheme. So we've also got fantastic public realm. The public realm is, I would say, I think the scheme will win awards, and bestow that glory really to the architects who helped us. Really, they did design it with our the backing as the developer, but that's been Simpson. They've come up with, I think, it's a fantastic scheme. A lot of green space. It's quite a different scheme for Manchester. Manchester's got quite a beautiful landscape, in my opinion. But it's not a hard choice to want to work in Manchester because it's a fantastic city, and really, I'd say Manchester is probably the capital of the north. You know, a lot of Liverpoolians might not like to hear that, but really, it's something that we should embrace. And anyone in the northwest, Leeds included, and the other northern cities, because we've done such a good job in Manchester, and it's helping. You know, it's helping to set benchmarks, and that's good. You know, quality benchmarks that we've all got to try and get to in our own relevant home cities. You know.
Yeah, the transformation that Manchester's had over a generation is something that many cities rightly aspire to. Yeah. Just the events of the last couple of years and the pandemic, how has that changed your thinking about how cities work or how investable they are? You know, what are you doing differently now than you were in 2019?
2019.
Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, well, so I would say that the fundamental, the real bet is how many people are going to come back to the office spaces now. My shout is that a lot more will come back than what people might perceive. Whether that stays that way long term, technology will be the biggest driver of that, you know, for virtual meetings, etc. But when you've got a young workforce, I don't see, unless the technology is really super duper, so you're next door to someone instantly and communicating with them, young people need to learn. And young people and old people, I've been doing this for years and I'm still learning. So I think the best environment for learning is being around people. You get fresh ideas, you get smart ideas, you get some bloody rubbish ones as well. But generally, being around people is where you get like creative thought process to improve schemes. Since 2019, I think some of the big differences in our buildings going forward are going to be our ESG policy and how we make the buildings more environmentally friendly. In this scheme in Manchester, which is, as I say, is a huge scheme, you know, with circa £500 million, which is it's a big job for anyone. And I remember, I can just digress in a second. I remember when I was first buying one of the buildings, and someone said to me, "Oh, you have to be careful, man. You know, having a building that's got more value than 100 million could be very tricky." This was a leading international agent. This one 4 or 5 years ago, and here we are building a £500 million scheme. It's quite. I thought it was uncanny how people underestimated Manchester and the strength of it as a city. Sorry, I get back on track with your question. I generally think placemaking is a big thing since we've all been locked up in COVID, and that's what I think this scheme in Fair Street addresses. It's got a lot of outside area that you could go and sit in and enjoy. It's got lots of bigger apartments. It's got some smaller apartments too. But there's lots of amenity space, and there's enough amenity space. For example, if you've been operating through the pandemic, there's enough amenity space, even if you close some, to allow space to be used by your residents. You know, so there's an above, and we put in the amenity space. That's included a lot of what we call work from home facilities. You know, like the WeWork style of offices. So we'll have printing machines, we'll have business events there. So people can generally work and live in the same environment. And I mean, that's it. When they're choosing not to be in their office, they can literally work from home, but they don't necessarily have to work exactly in their apartment. They can just get the escalator down and be at work. And then on the other days when they do go to the office, which my shout is there's going to be a bit more than what people are anticipating, possibly. So I think that's one of the differences is creating more amenity space in the buildings, you know?
Yeah. And how far ahead are you looking at the moment? And how much certainty do you feel in in your gut about the direction of travel?
Well, any scheme that we do, which are generally bigger schemes to an institutional standard, generally take us, unfortunately, with the planning process, the building process, about 7 or 8 years. So we have to. I would say probably from the financial world, that's probably a medium perspective. But to me, it's quite a long time away. So we just have to look at the market, engage the market to make sure, number one, we've got the accommodation right, but secondly, that we believe the market will still be there in terms of value by the time we get it income producing. So that's the biggest risk to us. But if I look at, for example, even the First Street site, First Street won't be ready for another 2 years, and we've already been on it 3 years or 2.5 years. So, and the whole total scheme won't be finished till 26. So it's quite a long ways out, isn't it, when you think of it that way? But I think what we're building is there's a strong market for, and then you've got to pick the right cities to do that, which we've pretty confidently done that with Manchester. So you've got enough young professionals, you've got enough mature students who will look for type of accommodation. So hopefully our surveys that we've done on the marketplaces and the information we've gathered will stand us in good stead, and they'll be very successful schemes. I'm very confident. Yeah. So we have to, in short, we have to look quite a long way ahead.
And given that sort of long-term planning and vision that you have, I suppose at the same time, then change can be quite slow, because you have the idea today, and the next scheme, it's going to be sort of 2030 before the first residents are in it. But how does the North in general help with that process? Are the things that whether it's councils, investors, businesses, whoever, can do to make the North more attractive for these big schemes and longer term visions?
Well, from a development point of view, before you get into the authorities, how they can help us, we like, for example, in Fair Street, we will have a space which is, we call it shell space for the minute. And when we first started on this journey, part of that shell space was going to be a supersized gym, part of it was going to be offices, and I think that space still will be that type of facility, but we're delaying the final decision on the design for as long as we can to allow where the markets are moving. Maybe put a food hall in there, for example.
Yeah.
The authorities is a big thing. Connectivity is key, to other cities, which we're all hearing about. And data and physical connectivity. I mean, not just like getting from A to B. The connectivity of data, etc., is really important. Major infrastructure investments, the airport, fibre, HS2 are really important. I think that's also a big thing, that a lot of people are always looking at your capital cities like London, and London's very good, but then, and we've been very successful in London. We've got huge schemes in London. We just finished one this year, £400 million residential scheme, offices, but there'll be strong investor demand for that building, the strong tenant demand for it, and in turn there'll be strong investor demand for it. But London's returns are generally, there could be possibly bigger returns to be had in the regions if you do your job right. So I think you've got to build things to an international standard, and you'll get international investment that'll want to come. Manchester's a great case in point for that. So you'll if you build the right product, and university, you've got great universities in Manchester, but for them to keep attracting these international students who are coming in abundance, you've got to keep ahead of the game, otherwise they'll go somewhere else. So university's got to keep ahead of the game, and the accommodation's got to be to an international standard to keep those people coming, because it's inward investment to our northern cities, and hopefully this extra revenue will help bring other social economic factors where, you know, there'll be spin-offs for that, but there's more business being created, more income being created, and that'll mean more social housing can be built and better jobs created for the workforce. So I think the North has got lots to, there's lots of opportunities in the North of England, I feel. And I'm repeating again, but I think Manchester's been a significant part, as has Liverpool, by the way, for certain types of. But I think Liverpool can do better than it's been doing, you know. And I think some of the local developers, myself included, will relook at Liverpool and look and see maybe it's time that Liverpool had different types of accommodation built there, you know, for bigger family accommodation in the city centres rather than all these small units that everyone built some bigger ones for people to live in inside the city centre. And the office buildings are, there's been a few new office buildings being built, but around the time there's some like science buildings. That's all very important for Manchester too, and on the gateways, you know, for these science buildings. You've got some good commercial landlords there. You've got Bluntwoods and people like that. You've also got, you know, other local developers, I'm sure, will be looking now to, Russell and families like that, will be looking to do different types of development, which will create more inward investment to Manchester, and the same as in Liverpool.
Yeah, and you must have an awful lot on your desk, an awful lot of opportunities come across it. What is it that at the moment you get excited by, and what would you really jump out at you as a great opportunity?
Well, first of all, great sites are getting scarcer and scarcer at the moment, and I'm specialising in residential accommodation. So a great opportunity for me would be if I could find another site like the one I bought for Patricia, like the one I bought for Scottish in Newcastle. Those are the type of sites that I really would like to buy. And so if I could find another big headquarter building that I thought was the wrong design, etc. Because I just bought the Virgin. Well, last year I bought the Virgin Bank headquarters in Leeds, and I looked at that. That was quite an exciting opportunity because it had a lot of space around it, and I knew I could do something there if I could agree something with the city, which I managed to do. So they're the type of opportunities that excite us as a company, because then we can build scale and we can create good spaces and good, you know, it's not just the building, it's what you're building around the building, the public realm. And it's nothing new to any of this stuff, by the way. People have been doing it for years, but you've got to keep on top of it and make the buildings that bit smarter and that bit greener. So, you know, it's a set placemaking. That's what that scheme of Fair Street they create. So they're the type of schemes that would excite me to try and buy. I need another hospital building to buy, like the one we bought in Liverpool.
Well, I'll keep my eye out for them. And just finally, just to finish off, what's next for Downing?
Well, we're also a lot of institutional capital. So I'm hoping that this next year, I think we'll align ourselves to co-invest with a big investment platform, so we can carry on building larger scale projects and help to build buildings and communities that were there for another generation. And that's really what our focus is at the moment. So it sort of ties in with it. I'll try to give you an answer about the type of buildings we want to buy, sites we want to buy. But for us to keep buying these type of developments, because they take us so long to do from when you get to A to B, it's good to do if you could do that with institutional capital. because you can soon run out of money very quickly. We don't have dozens of sites. We've always got, we've got great opportunities to work over on site in Edinburgh. We're on site. Well, we're planning a great scheme in Brighton next to the football club. The Virgin Bank headquarters in Leeds. That's going to be a great development there. Fair Street, which we're on site for. We started that at risk without finance in place, which was a big risk in itself, but we wanted to make sure we delivered. And I think that's another reason why the city likes us so, and why we'd always get an opportunity to buy something, because they know that we're doers as a company. We don't just sit on things, we make them happen as quickly as possible in a complicated development world, which we are in today, because you've got to build safe buildings, etc. So that's where I think we're at. We've got the assets, we've got the expertise, we've got a proven track record for a long time of we currently manage about 8,000 bedrooms. Some of those are for investors who bought the buildings from us, and we manage them very successfully, and they've achieved what we said they would achieve. So, and a lot of those buildings will be owned in very small segments, but from the institutions that have invested in them, the pension authorities, will probably be, working class people who are, got the pensions in them, and they're getting a nice return on it, that's really satisfying. That, the underlying investment sometimes for pension funds, you forget it's mums and dads and nurses and doctors and people like that who've got the pensions riding on these buildings. So I'm very confident that we can carry on and build these type of institutional class assets that so that can benefit other people.
Yeah, it's a great example, often overlooked, of how everybody can benefit from the regeneration of our cities and towns. And well, Joe, that's been fascinating, George. Really appreciate you joining us at Invest North. I think there's a lot to take away from that. So thank you very much. And thanks very much to George. Always upbeat, always optimistic. And I look forward to seeing those developments he talked about come forward over the years ahead. In a couple of minutes, we'll get started with our next session on transport connectivity and infrastructure investment. So stay where you are, and I'll be back with you, joined by a great panel that includes Transport for the North, Manchester Airports Group, BECG, TransPennine Express, and the Northern Powers Partnership. We'll get started very shortly at 10:55, so I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Back to pre-COVID levels, passenger numbers for the group were in excess of 60 million. And then in FY21, we did 6 million, or served 6 million passengers. So if you compare that to the global financial crisis, when passenger numbers dropped by 13%, to see passenger numbers drop by in excess of 90 is absolutely devastating. So now, as we move through this financial year, we started the beginning of the year estimating that we'd be around 25 to 40%, and we're within that kind of range still today. We did see the recovery coming. So in October and November, we're in excess of 60% of pre-pandemic levels. But Omicron then reduced those numbers in December and January, and we dropped back down in January to 37% of pre-pandemic levels. But we are hopeful that we'll get in excess of 60 now for February. So I think, again, we're very confident that the recovery is beginning to come back, and subject to no more travel restrictions and variants and everything else with the volatility that is still out there to some extent. I think we are very positive about FY22. IATA actually recently published some data to suggest that FY22 would be, for Europe, in excess of 86% of pre-pandemic levels. So we'll effectively achieve 40 years growth over the space of 2 years. So that's going to be very challenging.
And Matthew, are you seeing a similar return on the trains? How's that looking?
Well, it's definitely getting busier, Alex. We're about 68% of where we were pre-COVID. So we moved 57,000 passengers on our network yesterday. That compares to the 84,000 that we did pre-Omicron. I think it's fair to say commuter, business and leisure travel has probably changed permanently from where it was. We certainly think that leisure will be more important in the post-COVID world than it was before. It was about 73% of TPE's business prior to the pandemic. It's already into the 80s as its importance to us as a business. I think one of the things that we see as our key task this year is there are still passengers who aren't as assured about travelling on the railway. We need to reassure them that we continue to have clean trains, reliable trains. And we also, I think, as a society, we need to get people used to the value of face-to-face contact. I think, we've all got used to a Zoom and a Teams world, but I'm sure many of you watching us today will have met some people recently and gone, goodness me, that's a pleasant experience. And I think it's really, really important that we encourage those people back. Because as we'll be talking later, transport's really, really good for the health of our societies that we serve in the north. We've got a big role to play. I think in terms of the longer term forecast, we'd hope that as we go through the back end of 23 to 24, that we're back to approaching the level of patronage that we saw before. But certainly as somebody who's recently moved back to the north and is experiencing the delights of the M62 from time to time, at the railway, we've got a big job in helping shift people to a sustainable form of transport. Thanks, Alex. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Henry, you seem to be on a one-man propaganda mission to both encourage people back to face-to-face meetings and to get on the trains. If anyone follows Henry on Twitter, you'll be familiar with the daily updates of which stations he's travelling to, from, and between. But how important is it for business to get back out there and to make sure that we're giving that positive message?
So I think, the challenge, isn't it, is that you can't look at the recovery in isolation. So I think my kind of reflection on both Matthew and Jan's comments would be that particularly business travel and not necessarily habitual commuting, actually, which doesn't necessarily have the same economic value. I think we all presupposed it did. I think there's lots of value to people going into the office some of the time, but I don't think anyone's saying that we need to return to 5-day-week commuting. And ironically, on those Friday evening trains where the leisure crush and the commuters used to meet each other, ironically, from a demand management perspective, I imagine Matthew's quite happy that maybe Fridays are a bit quieter on the railway, because it means you can then replace that market with other markets that previously maybe were deterred because the trains were too busy to be able to capture that value. And particularly as someone who travels longer distance, probably on Matthew's network than most people, I'm in Liverpool tomorrow, back to Leeds, and then to your dinner in Manchester, Alex. So I think I'll be making 3 journeys tomorrow on one of Matthew's trains. The point is that you do want people to be able to travel those longer distances across the north, and actually just people commuting from Stalybridge to Manchester actually uses up lots of seats that could enable people to travel further. So some reductions in very short-term commuting behaviour at peak does enable potentially us to serve a larger number of people who are travelling further, which is not a bad thing necessarily economically. So I think there is some benefits to be had from people making smarter use of the transport system. And I think, very much reflecting what Jan was saying, I think the pent-up demand of anyone who talks to people who, after the half-term break, who've been away on holiday, there's certainly a lot of people who still want to travel internationally for leisure. I think how we build that business demand is a bigger challenge for us. And I think what I would reflect is that particularly the long-term value of destinations like the China flights to India, the excellent connectivity across the states that we have through Manchester Airport, the loss of long-haul links through the pandemic is an ongoing issue for us. Because if you want to be able to attract investment, if you want to encourage businesses in the north to export, they are going to have to return to those kind of face-to-face conversations that Matthew was talking about. And as much as those like Tim and I might bang on about the need to make the best of the long-term improvements we need to make to the north of England's transport system, there are some really immediate goals around internationalisation that we can't lose track of. And remember, the Northern Powerhouse was never about just people getting from any kind of unspecified West Yorkshire city or the North East to Manchester or Liverpool and doing in greater numbers. The internationalisation of the four prime capabilities, North Energy, manufacturing, digital energy, health innovation, all of these things are absolutely dependent on access to international markets and access to international investments. And we have to prioritise supporting colleagues at MAG to get back those direct routes when we can, which will absolutely drive investment and productivity in the north of England. And without it, without better internationalisation, the north of England will not achieve its economic potential. Even if you did all the other things, if you invested in skills and education, if you invested in proper industrial strategy, if you thought through about what you would do around innovation and R&D, it isn't just about domestic connectivity or connectivity within the north or within city regions. We absolutely need to get the international travel dimension right. And I think one of my real challenges to Matthew is always about making sure that despite what we're going to do, ripping up the rail network across the north, some of which we're going to do anyway, more of which we're going to do post-integrated rail plan, we have to protect those links from the North East and Yorkshire to Manchester airports, because giving passengers flying overseas a reliable experience doesn't just depend on Matthew, it's also a number of other operators, including Northern, of course, that for Liverpool in particular, that serve the airport. But we have to make sure that whatever happens around alternative routes and capacity constraint across the Pennines during engineering work and through the whole of Trans-Pennine Route upgrade, that we build demand to be able to fly from Manchester, because otherwise, when we eventually get the integrated rail plan, nobody will use the bleeding thing, right? Because if people don't get into the habit of being able to take public transport to Manchester Airport in particular, we're never going to get people reducing their cost for getting to an airport. At the moment, so many people in Yorkshire and the North East drive down to Heathrow to be able to travel around the world. That is, in a car, very carbon intensive, actually. And fundamentally, one of the real opportunities is to get people using those surface access solutions. And sadly, sometimes the previous issues we've had, the 2018 timetable chaos, which obviously predated Matthew in the role, but was a real challenge for the whole industry, which I know we've all hopefully learned from significantly. And also what's happened during COVID have probably got people out of the habit of getting a train to the airport, as well as getting people back on planes. We also need to get them back on Matthew's services and on Northern trains to get to the airport as well.
Yeah, Tim, just on that point, how do we balance, that sort of that wish for everything to be perfect tomorrow, and know that actually to get to a much better future position that works for all commuters will require some pain along with the investment.
Well, I mean, these are long-term investments that the government are going to be making, particularly through the integrated rail plan, and then of course through the next phase of the road program, the RIS program. Ultimately, we just want to make sure that those decisions are evidence-based, that we understand what the outcomes are going to be before we make that investment. And I think, further work going into international connectivity versus active travel versus are we phasing out as we phase out petrol and diesel cars, do we have enough charging points, EV points? There's a whole agglomeration of things still to be worked through. And it's not just as simple as we can have all this tomorrow. Of course, we also need the investment. I mean, currently at the moment, I think the government owes somewhere around about £2.5 trillion. There's going to be quite an interest bill, I would have thought, in paying that back each month. So ultimately, the money's got to be spent wisely. But I think if I could just come back on a couple of things, because I think it's quite interesting stats at the moment. So in the North's major stations, the average recovery rate at the moment is 81% of pre-COVID levels, with Liverpool and Leeds actually occupying the two top places on the table. Manchester Piccadilly's in 5th place, but it's ahead of Birmingham and London Euston. And I think the London average at the moment is just 58%, with the sort of non-Northern or London stations averaging around 63% of pre-COVID levels. And I think that's really important, that even coming out of the sort of first phase of COVID and then the Omicron phase, the North came back a lot quicker, getting back onto those trains. And while Matthew's absolutely right, there was a change in direction. It was more sort of tourism based went through the roof, whereas us sort of going back to work did still stay back around the 70 or 80%, but it was always continuously higher than the southeast. And I think, again, that's just happened. We haven't got the capacity and connectivity in the north to keep that growth going. That's why we need that right investment coming from an evidence base.
Yeah. And Kevin, what's your perspective on the infrastructure investment that's required for the north at the moment?
Well, I suppose I can only really jump in here as a regular commuter and user of our dilapidated infrastructure in many parts of the region. But I do see on a day-to-day basis my station getting busier, where I jump on and jump off on. I have been able to use Jan's Airport twice in the past 12 months for various trips abroad, and the second time was certainly busier than the first time. So I think that I think confidence from users is there, but we're facing this perennial problem, aren't we, where we feel that we're not getting the level of investment over the long term that we think we all deserve and need. But having said that, there have been some big announcements, haven't there, recently? We may not be completely satisfied with the level of some of that ambition, but we've got to work with what's there at the minute. And I think certainly the clients that we work with, there's a lot of pent-up private sector funding around specific opportunities that are really looking at how can the private sector invest in some of this infrastructure to deliver wider growth, be that housing, be that employment. And I think we've got to start as a sort of northern business community thinking about what can we do together to fund some of this if we're not going to get the investment coming from Whitehall.
No, absolutely. And just before we delve into some of the details around the investment and future plans, we could just have a look at the other sort of long-term driver of change, on net zero ambitions across the region. Obviously, transport is central to that. What are we doing at the moment to prepare for what we know is coming down the track, and what are people's expectations around changing consumer behaviour or what their expectations will be from your providers and operators? Jan, can I start with you on that?
Yeah, so from a Manchester Airport Group, we actually started on our decarbonisation journey back in 2006, 2007, when we committed to our airports being net carbon neutral. And we actually achieved that in Manchester by 2015, Manchester being the first. So we've very much been on a path to net zero, and now working with Manchester City Council committed to 2038. But clearly it's not just on the ground, it's in the air as well. So we're working with sustainable aviation, and the government have set up the Jet Zero Council. So our chief exec, Charlie Cornish, is actually part of that, looking at a roadmap for decarbonising aviation overall by the 2050 commitment. So all of those things are in play. To your point, the consumer will become more knowledgeable, more aware, so we can do things, and we don't believe that should you have to reduce demand. As long as you're focused on the decarbonisation, then actually it's about educating users, maybe some carbon offsets, something we've certainly introduced, showing league tables of airlines and who's being more successful on their decarbonisation journey. And I think we believe by doing that can help educate the user. And then as long as the industry is working on its decarbonisation, then we should get both a win-win and a successful, sustainable aviation industry.
Absolutely. And Matthew, while one of the sort of simpler answers is, for more people to get out of their cars and onto the trains when they're travelling, what else are TransPennine doing in terms of sustainability?
Well, we've changed our fleet over the last few years. More electric trains, more bi-mode trains. We've literally in the last couple of weeks gone out to the market to look for expressions of interest to replace one of our diesel fleets with bi-mode trains, and shortly we want to come out to the market as the start of the process for new trains to support the TransPennine upgrade. As Henry said, everybody who's choosing to get in a car and go down to London their carbon footprint is considerably more, probably by at least 2/3 more than it would otherwise be if they were traveling by train. So I think Jan's right. People are becoming more aware. So yes, we need to change the physical infrastructure, but we also do need to help people understand as discerning customers what the value of that journey is from a carbon impact point of view. And we are just about to submit to government our proposals to support our journey to net zero, recognising that the government's got a target of 2050. The Scots are at 2045, and as Jan said, much more locally, we've got a much greater level of ambition in the Manchester area. So I think the key thing now for us is collectively to show pace in this area. I think that's what society expects of us.
Yeah, and Henry, from a policy point of view, there are so many competing pressures. There's the short-term need for economic recovery. There's the long-term need, which is increasingly short-term, to address the climate change issues. There's the competing pressures of what metro mayors want, what transport providers want, what business might want. How do we make sure that, as best as we can, everybody's pulling in the same direction?
So I think we need that collective action, don't we? And I mean, later this week we'll be bringing together businesses from across the north, from transport and other sectors, along with colleagues at EY, to think about how we address these challenges, because I think it needs collective challenge, Alex, from business and from the public sector. And I think particularly as we face the headwinds of what's happening around the costs of heating our homes, but also the commercial cost pressures of those businesses that rely on gas, I think what we're seeing is a very sort of quick accelerating of the need to address these issues. Does that make sense? So clearly, the decarbonisation of electricity is going to come up the policy agenda even higher than it has been for a number of years. And I think specifically as it relates to transport, you need to be part of that wider collective solution, because actually there is no answer to the role of hydrogen, either in actually as a potential jet fuel. I know speculation this week and reports even that it's being considered for long haul, for instance, or working out whether it might be an answer for some of Matthew's trains, right, or for some of Northern's fleet for certain routes. If you don't understand the role hydrogen is going to play in the wider economy, for instance, and the role it might play in terms of as a potential solution for other problems and challenges of hard to decarbonise issues. So you don't just think about these things in isolation, Alex. You've got to have a coherent approach. And I think one of the things that does disappoint me is in the UK, and it's something our Vice Chair Jürgen Myers observed publicly, and we've said it more collectively as well, is that we didn't do enough on the opportunity to capture the jobs and investment that came along with offshore wind. We probably haven't done as much as we could have done on electric vehicles, if I'm honest, and we could have captured more of that value. The hydrogen economy is the next big sort of ticket option. The CCUS transitions going on in the Mersey and on the Humber and in the northeast positions us very strongly for hydrogen as well in the north of England. So what we aren't just saying is we don't just buy one hydrogen train here or one project there. We've got to think about the whole supply chain. And certainly we highlighted that for Goole, which we focused on as one of our kind of towns that we were particularly thinking would potentially have great potential in the north of England. There's huge opportunity there to think about the role hydrogen could play as a fuel in the wider rail industry across the world, and doing the R&D and the innovation, not just the assembly or the manufacturing of the trains themselves. So we're really excited about the potential there is in the north of England for innovation in the rail and the aviation sector. And I think particularly as Jan mentioned around fuels in a Manchester airport, you've also got Phillips 66 doing great work on the Humber actually around aviation fuels for BA as well, for AAG. So I think there are real examples across the north following the leadership of organisations like Manchester Airport in the aviation sector. And I think some of the quite kind of narrow debates we've had about the role that aviation plays in our economy, about aviation expansion in West Yorkshire, for example, have really completely ignored the decarbonisation pathway in aviation and its importance. And there's a lot of, from the wider public, kind of labelling good things and bad things, and sort of trains are good and planes are bad. And in reality, that very simplistic approach to achieving net zero, as much as it might make people feel better about themselves, it doesn't actually help anyone, because I'm not in the business of telling working class people who live in Manchester or Liverpool that they can't have a family holiday to save the planet. I don't think that's going to work. I'm also not in the business of telling people in Liverpool or on the Mersey that they don't have their job in their oil refinery or in their steelworks anymore because of net zero. I don't think that's going to work either. And I think we don't need to do that. We should be using CCUS to produce new jobs on those clusters, not taking away those roles that have already existed and replacing them with nothing, because we need an industrial solution to net zero. We need a jobs-based approach, and we need investment from government to generate the supply chains. And the really important role of transport providers and transport operators and those who operate infrastructure assets like MAG, I think, is to be enablers as part of a wider system approach. But they themselves cannot solve all the problems of their own industry in isolation. And the problem at the moment is that government isn't providing enough of a framework or enough of a significant degree of investment from the centre to genuinely de-risk the sensible investments that lots of privately run and owned businesses would take if government provided the right environment for them to do so.
Kevin, it feels to me like one of the broader themes that has been coming through over recent months for business in general is the idea of responsible business. And we mentioned Jürgen Mayer, and it's very much one of his key themes at the moment, that where government leaves a gap on policy or direction, then it's for business to step forward. Do you think businesses are in the right position to show that leadership on these themes like net zero?
I think they absolutely are, and you might not see it sort of in headline grabbing initiatives, but we see it day to day in a lot of the investments that our clients are wanting to make and the developments they're wanting to pursue. We've got retail clients who are looking at delivering new food stores across the north. They're already putting in the infrastructure for EV points, not just the ones that you see in the ground at the minute, the handful of EV charging points, but the infrastructure underground for when the demand gets there for 20 plus EV charging points outside their stores over the years to come. We're seeing it with logistics parks, really looking at how they can tap into the EV demand. We're seeing it around new homes being based around rail hubs and other sort of public transport hubs. So I think actually business is stepping up. You just, in lots of little and sort of incremental ways. They're not necessarily waving flags and shouting about it too loud. One of the things I do think we need to touch on, though, with the net zero agenda is buses. We've not mentioned buses yet in this conversation. And, I think the opportunities in Greater Manchester and in Liverpool, where there is an opportunity to really look at how the regulation of buses and therefore the types of vehicles and the routes that they serve, is an important part in encouraging people to give up those carbon busting cars and finding a different way to do a lot of the shorter distances that perhaps the railway isn't the best appropriate sort of journey to do.
I think that has been one of the interesting things of devolution, how a lot local issues like buses has risen to the top of the policy agenda in a way that it hadn't, and where that's Andy Burnham in Manchester, Steve Rotham, who had announcements in Liverpool last week, and Tracy Braben in West Yorkshire. They're all very serious about the importance of buses to communities and to that connectivity, both in a transport sense and an economic sense. Just conscious of time, Tim, in terms of policy, and we've had disappointments around investment plans with the IRP and the like. What is it that we should be optimistic about, and what should we be really looking for in terms of progress on our transport networks?
I think there's a lot of optimism out there, particularly as people are starting to go back to work. I mean, this is the first day back in the office for me in Transport for the North. But I think ultimately, there's a need to just rethink our approach to transport. Clearly, we need to reduce the environmental impact of transport, not just in terms of decarbonisation, but of course also air quality. But it's also one that, reflects the shift away from owning transport to accessing transport. And it's particularly important that we reflect the needs of an ageing society. How do we support individuals to maintain independent living and to reduce demand on sort of social care and health services? And then we need to sort of bring into that, the acceleration of growth in e-commerce, which has implications for how we design our cities, how we should repurpose parts of the cities away from shops to other uses potentially, and what are the transport implications of that, and of course the growth of hybrid working and how transport usage, not just sort of in terms of volume, but also in terms of distribution over the day. So there's a place for all modes of transport, but that further push towards far better public transport, I think, is going to be the key. And that's where we call for the government to continue with the investment, to continue using organisations like Transport for the North, that's been going sort of 8 years now, nearly, just bringing together the leaders of the North to have those discussions on the evidence that's produced and make sure that we get that modal shift in a format that we can control the growth. We're able to make sure that ultimately you've got a wide range of choices as the individual, but we must replace fossil fuel as we go forward.
And Jan, just from your perspective on that policy sense, government seems to have wavered a little bit on airports and its approach over the last couple of years. Do you feel that you have sufficient backing as a sector from the government at the moment?
Well, I think as far as the sector support, we were only given the furlough grants this year and a little bit on the AGOS scheme that you may be aware of on the rates recovery. But other than that, very little support through the pandemic. And then moving forward now, it's about that investment in infrastructure. We are committed on the HS2 phase 2B for Manchester Airport to be part of that, but so far not the funding. So we're working for the government on how that will be funded. And clearly that will be of great benefit.
Great. And conscious of time, if I could just get in a sentence or two from each of you, and I will start with Henry. What's the absolute priority for the transport network in the years ahead?
I think to build some of it, Alex, and not just talk about it.
Sounds good. Matthew?
Spend wisely, deliver quickly, and as Henry said, keep people moving who need to move right in the middle of all of that work, and deliver the benefits more quickly than people expect them to have been delivered.
Sounds good. Kevin?
Do you know what? I'm going to agree with what's just said. I think we just need to get on with what's been announced and get it through, because otherwise we're going to keep having these conversations for the next 5 years, aren't we?
Let's hope not. Tim?
I think for me it's quite simple. We're decades behind our European cousins in terms of rail electrification. We're still only around 40% of the network, as opposed to 60% and above for France and Germany. We need to get on with that electrification part of the route to net zero.
Great. And Jan?
Sustainable growth and building that global connectivity, which Henry talked about, absolutely key.
Yeah, no, great. Well, thanks all. I mean, we could have spent the entire 3 hours just on transport. There's so many directions and branches to go off on, but appreciate all of your contributions. That's been really interesting. Thank you. On the other side of the stage, I'm going to be joined by Oliver Steele, head of Mott MacDonald City Studio, to talk about the levelling up agenda. So I will see you in about 10 seconds. Transport and connectivity, is a big part of levelling up, whether that's the government's agenda or what we understand it in our communities and companies as well. But I'm delighted to be joined by Oliver from Mott MacDonald, who's going to talk about why levelling up and placemaking really must go hand in hand. So Oliver, over to you.
Well, thank you, Alex, and thank you for inviting me to contribute today. And clearly, this conference is an important opportunity to talk about the impact that continued and growing investment is going to have on what is already a very dynamic and successful part of the country. So, as Alex said, my name is Oliver Steele, and I work at Mott MacDonald, where I'm a director. And many of you will know that Mott's is a global engineering, management, and development consultancy, and we're very proud of the strong heritage and presence that we have in the North of England, with offices, people and clients across the region. And now, a city studio, which I lead, is something that brings together our capabilities in town planning, place economics and urban design consultancy to deliver a new and integrated advisory service when it comes to master planning, place shaping and business planning to our clients across the UK and internationally. And our goal within the City Studio is to develop viable and holistic and integrated urban strategies, spatial frameworks and projects that enable places and communities to grow and thrive. So this means that myself and Mott MacDonald are very deeply invested in levelling up, and it's something we've been involved in for many years in projects that have contributed to local economic development and rebalancing both in the UK and globally around the world. And it's what we've learned from this long experience and how it shapes the work of Mott MacDonald and the City Studio that I want to share with you today. And so firstly, I want to be clear what I mean about rebalancing and levelling up. I think all too often policymakers based in London can talk about North England in terms that make it sound like it's failing. And of course, anyone who's spent any time in this part of the world knows how far from the truth that is. Without resorting too much to cliche, of course, the North was the cradle of the Industrial Revolution. Today has many highly successful, cutting edge and forward-looking businesses, academic institutions and civic organisations, and many of which are very long-standing and all of which are contributing towards levelling up. But nevertheless, there is a persistent gap in productivity and output between the north and the southeast of this country. Too many highly qualified people from this region still they have to move away to succeed at work, and not enough businesses are moving into this area as they grow. So it seems to me, as in any other country where I work, we have to answer two key questions where we face a similar set of challenges. Firstly, how do we foster, attract, or how do we further foster, attract and retain talent within the north of England as a whole? And secondly, how do we attract further inward investment to the north of England, delivering economic opportunities and jobs? And to answer these challenges, the conventional wisdom has been to focus on a few core elements: education, skills training, business support, the availability of a range of housing and better connectivity, which opens up new job possibilities and raises productivity. And much of the commentary on major investment projects is based on these elements. In fact, we at Mott MacDonald, we published a paper on Northern Power's rail last autumn that looked in detail at a proposed link between Leeds, Bradford and Manchester, impact that might have on the regional labour market and productivity. And these are valid and important points, and we will be returning to them shortly in a new paper, which will look at the strategic planning in towns and cities across the north and how to take account of individual local strengths and also the region-wide system in which they're located, encouraging places to trade one another on the basis of economic, cultural and wider specialisations. But while jobs, housing and connectivity are necessary, it seems to me they are not sufficient. The full impact of rebalancing and levelling up will only be found if critically important quality of life concerns in placemaking are also taken into account. And as is widely accepted, cultural, social, educational health and other soft elements are important drivers alongside the availability of jobs and making people want to migrate into areas and also not want to leave. In other words, human and social capital is critical. It's not enough simply to move jobs around or put in better rail, road or digital connections in a local area. Placemaking has to be considered in the round. And yes, we need outstanding public spaces and compelling cultural institutions. And we need development that is sympathetic to the landmarks, character and history of a place. But we also have to devise urban solutions to put people first, enabling them to grow and thrive. And there are already many strong, vibrant and healthy communities led by empowered local leadership in the north. And our challenge, it seems to me, is to ensure there are many more. Mott MacDonald has for years incorporated this holistic approach to placemaking in all aspects of our work, and it's at the core of what we see as our social purpose. It starts by recognising that inherent in the disparity of opportunities is diversity of need. Each city, town and region of the UK has different challenges. History and geography have played their part, giving rise to very different local economies and associated challenges. And within the north, there are distinct challenges within and between different towns and cities. And to me, this means each project, each plan must be based on detailed understanding and engagement of those stakeholders you're seeking to support. And each project equally has to consider the whole system, how the use of land, requirements for jobs, talents, demand and housing needs all interrelate. Looking at individual brownfield sites in isolation limits the overall impact and can be detrimental to the overall needs of a city or town. Now, there are a number of examples of where this approach is yielding results. Places like Oldham, where we are supporting the development of the UK's largest urban farm and eco park, safeguarding the town's historic market, creating new employment space to support new high-value employment opportunities, and creating a new performance space as part of an emerging cultural quarter. Or Workington in West Cumbria, where we're helping develop a sports village, offering local football and rugby league clubs a home fitting for their history, and much needed community sporting facilities in what's clearly a remote part of the country. Or Morley in West Yorkshire, where we're helping make the case for the renovation of the Grade 1 listed Morley Town Hall, a heritage fund to protect and maintain Morley's other historic buildings, and also a skills campus for adult learning. Now, each of these projects have been taken forward through working collaboratively and proactively with local communities and local leaders. In these places and many other communities across North, we are seeing levelling up taking place in practice by adopting this holistic, integrated approach. Now, against this backdrop, it is worth assessing the government's levelling up white paper. It has been criticised by some, but in my view, its ambition and breadth of vision at least should be welcomed. It is hugely encouraging that there seems to be at last an understanding in Whitehall of how to tackle the challenge. And this is the first time in a long time that we're seeing a set of all-encompassing policies aimed at rebalancing the UK economy and at further closing that productivity gap I described earlier between the North and South East. The various targets proposals were refreshingly wide-ranging and thorough, it feels to me. But of course, the white paper must be just the start. To deliver a truly place-based approach, we're going to need to see joined-up thinking and delivery right across Whitehall. The Department for Levelling Up, Homes and Communities have made bold commitments, but other departments are going to have to step up to meet them. Long-term commitment is required, and funding based on place rather than pet projects is essential. And we just have to avoid flip-flopping as governments change and ministers move around. And it goes without saying more money will be needed. And other people have said it, but it's always worth keeping in mind that perhaps the most successful ever example of levelling up, which to me is between East and West Germany, perhaps between West and East Germany, is estimated to have cost around 85 billion euros per year over around 25 years. In education and training, I think we need to increase our focus on equipping young people with ambition and skills that allow for investment by businesses seeking the best of global talent. I'm going to focus on connectivity within regions, not just between them, addressing neighbourhoods that in the past have sometimes only been transited through rather than really genuinely being communities for work, leisure and education in their own right. I think ways have to be found to incentivise true partnerships between business and communities to generate a stronger relationship between private sector investment, workforce development, profitability and sustained long-lasting benefit to local communities. And you've got things like the National TOMS Social Value Framework, which is really important in saying ambition, but I think the level to which it's driving true investment at the moment, I think many of us would accept is still limited. And finally, it seems to me that above all else, we have to follow through on the proposals for institutional reform at some national level, so that what is established for the future reflects the way that places are and function now, not as they did in the Victorian era when local government boundaries were crystallised. And that's because central government can only do so much. It can set regulatory environments that stimulate investment to create employment opportunities. It can prioritise spending on interventions that drive up performance in public services. And it can spend money on national infrastructure, bring improved connectivity and access to opportunity. But if we're going to retain talent within regions and attract inward investment, it is the space in and around these large-scale projects that will make the real difference. And here it is for the private sector and local and metropolitan authorities to lead the way, as of course, people on this conference know. So in this context, I think we need to think more radically about the role that local decision makers play and how and where we target efforts. And only then are we going to transform what's been centuries in the making and really respond to the wishes and needs of local people. And there is also an urgent need, I think, to dramatically augment the ability of some national bodies to make investment decisions, whether for increased powers to raise revenue or greater devolution decision making. And of course, the white paper does allude to this, but I think further clarity is needed on the way forward. And I think we need to help local and regional authorities move on from looking at individual projects to consider cities and wider city regions as a sort of system of systems, where the whole ecosystem needs to be considered if real change is actually going to be effective. So I think it seems to me, in short, that the white paper is a useful start, but there's much more that can and should be done to address this huge challenge that we face in rebalancing the UK economy. And as I said earlier, putting the old levers of public investment in jobs, housing and transport is helpful and it is essential, of course, but it's not enough. I think we need proper and effective placemaking led by local people to create vibrant, dynamic and desirable communities. And we need more of it because, of course, as I said earlier, that is already happening. And without this, it seems to me the levelling up will not be achieved. So thank you. I'll hand back to you, Alex.
Great. Thanks very much, Oliver. There's an awful lot packed in there. I think just got time for me to squeeze in one question to you. You talked about avoiding flip-flop, and many of these challenges of levelling up and productivity require real long-term thinking. how do we collectively make that shift in our mindset and get over sort of political cycles and those short-term periods and really start thinking in, I suppose, in decades, really?
I think it's a really good question, Alex. I think there's two levels to start on. Firstly, it's about how should central government be thinking in the longer term, and what sort of structure should be putting in place. I think there's work we've been doing, working with the Department for Levelling Up, the Department for Transport, Homes England, and other bodies, thinking about how that kind of funding approach can be put in place. I think it's fair to say that the evidence we've uncovered is that local communities, when they've actually local authorities, when they've been trying to access funding recently, have found funding too siloed, and they found that the change requirements are difficult to follow, and that there are very significant demands put on local authorities when it comes to trying to access funding. So I think a simpler, longer-term funding solution which doesn't change every time there is a ministerial reshuffle at a national level is clearly essential. But at the same time, we need within local authorities to have visions of what we're trying to achieve, and groups of local authorities what we're trying to achieve that go beyond that immediate cycle. And of course, that's really difficult to do. But I mean, if I was to give one example, which is not within this immediate region, but I think is powerful, would be the work that the East Midlands Growth Company was doing, looking at development across a range of authorities in the East Midlands for the then proposed East Midlands hub. I think that was a sort of structure which with empowered leadership, which goes outside of normal political arrangements, which brings in serious capacity within organisations, and which ties in leaders across authorities to a range of longer term plans and investments. I think that's the kind of model which can actually pay dividends, and that sort of model also then gives you greater credibility, I think, when working with national government, which can sometimes rightly say that local authorities sometimes change their minds, and it's hard for central government to follow what's needed from at a local level.
No, absolutely. Well, thanks very much for that, Oliver. That was really interesting, I think, giving us lots of food for thought. So I appreciate you joining us this morning. Next up, we're delighted to have Wayne Hemingway, who'll be examining the role of towns. And with a couple of guests, we'll focus on Morecambe and Calderdale to see what can be learned from their successes.
Good morning. Sure everybody can hear this. Nice to be here. So I'm just going to first of all talk for 10 minutes about my experience of town centres, and I think somebody else is going to put the slides up. So I'm from Hemingway Design. It's been a company that's been going for 40 years now. We're multidisciplinary designers, doing everything from master planning to visions to place making, place brands, and lots more. Next slide, please. And my experience, oh no, you've gone too many. And my experience of towns started in the town that I was brought up in, Blackburn, and the town centre there. So I started using the town centre a lot, probably from the age of 10, going to watch Blackburn Rovers. But the big thing that I remember about the town centre was it was the place that we went to concerts. And I'll always remember the day that I saw David Bowie in King George's Hall in Blackburn in 1972. And on the back of that, it was a case of going out, getting your hair cut when I had hair, buying the clothes and buying the records, of course. But everything revolved around culture. We didn't call it culture then, it was going out. I met my wife, that's a picture of me and my wife there when we were teenagers. We met in a disco in Burnley Town Centre, in Angels in Burnley Town Centre. And our lives were all about going into town, dancing, meeting friends, having a bite to eat. But the shopping was to fuel the cult, was on the back of culture, and then we went into a period. Next slide, please. And then the world went into a period where I think that was forgotten about, and probably through greed more than anything else, and probably by an example of the free market not working, that we allowed our town centres to become temples to consumerism, and absolutely stupid phrases like "shop till you drop" came to the fore in the 80s, and it became thought that everybody would just, all they wanted to do, and the best thing you could do in life was to shop. Well, how can it be? You'd have to have not a lot in your life if that was the thing that drove you to just go shopping in town centres. But that became the philosophy, and landlords, and councils were in cahoots, and they did it to us, and that resulted in, so in Blackburn, I went as my first company, Red or Dead. Me and my wife's first company, Red or Dead, opened a shop in Blackburn on the street that you see where it says Blackburn is open, and was very successful. But then, as we graduated more towards London and the big cities, and over the years, that street and other streets in Blackburn became almost totally closed down. And about 11 years ago, we were working with Blackburn Council, and they said, could we help them to reinvigorate Town Hall Street, as it's called? And they wanted us to do that stupid thing that towns do and put graphics in windows about what the past was like. And obviously, what's the point of that? So we had this idea that Blackburn is a making town. On my school blazer, it says Arte Labore. On my old school blazer, on my beloved Blackburn Rovers shirt, it says Arte Labore. Above the town hall, it said Arte Labore, which is by skill and hard work. Blackburn is a making town. We were able to prove that it has the highest proportion of people getting up in the morning and going to work and making. It's just short of 20%. The national average is 10, and cities are around 7. So we said, right, okay, let's give all of those shops to makers, whether you were hand printing wallpaper, whether you were making T-shirts, whether you were making chocolate, whether you were making new bikes from old parts, and as long as you were in the window of that, as long as you were in the window of that of the shop, and you were doing what we coined performance making, as long as you were making that making into a performance, then you could have the shop for X number of months for free, and it's been a big success, and that led on to the making rooms in Blackburn, which I haven't got time to explain, and then on to the National Festival of Making, which has been going for 7 years now and is Britain's major festival of making, and it can only take place in Blackburn. And when anybody else tries to do one, we take them to court, because we can prove that Blackburn owns the brand of Festival of Making. And obviously, when you and it's a free festival, and it's we sit on the CIC of this community interest company of it, and it will go on for a long time. But it's also helped to cement Blackburn as a making capital of the UK, and also really helped with Blackburn Town Centre. We bring 60,000 people at a time into Blackburn Town Centre, and since then Blackburn has won Town Centre of the Year award for twice now, I think. So next slide, please. And similarly, in London, we've been working with Argent for many years. And if you haven't visited King's Cross in the last few years, then have a look at what a modern and it is a town centre. It's the centre of King's Cross now, and what they've done with Coldrops Yard, and how we worked with them and put a charity shop, the top right hand corner, Shelter, as the anchor tenant in a shopping centre. And it's taking twice the square footage, twice the average of the square footage. You can do town centres differently. You can redo town centres. It's really exciting. There has never been a more exciting time to be in retail than now. But what it means is that that top left hand corner is what retail means to King's Cross. The bottom right hand corner is one of our events, the Classic Car Boot Sale. Again, it's about retail, but more than that, it's about dancing. It's about meeting friends. It's about having a drink and having food, and a convivial attitude. And that is back to how it was. And it's not revisionism. It's human values. That's what it's about. Next slide, please. And similarly, if you want to look up other things that we're doing, which are very similar to King's Cross, is the way we're working in the Greenwich Peninsula with the design district. We've been working there now for nine years. Got 2 big events coming up there, and the growth of Greenwich Peninsula on the back of placemaking and how well retail can do there now is amazing. And then other events that we do, First Light in Lowestoft. You might want to look at, the biggest beach festival in the UK and what that's doing. What that's doing for Lowestoft and the spin-offs for that, etc., etc. I'll keep going, or I'll run out of time. Next slide, please. And I'm sat here now in Media City in Salford, and we're working on an event, a placemaking event that launches this September. BBC, you'll hear a lot about it on the BBC. They're the major partners in it. It's called We Invented the Weekend, and this is one of my favourite placemaking initiatives that we've done and been involved in. Even though it's not started yet, we're so proud of it because it's doing exactly what placemaking is all about. And we found out that within yards of where we are now, there was a factory in 1843 that gave people the first time that factory workers were given Sunday off. So people got a weekend for the first time. And so we're doing a festival called We Invented the Weekend. And it's everything that people do at weekends. So partners in it are RHS, obviously, because we garden at the weekend, the Dog Society, the Canine Trust, Dogs Trust, because we walk dogs at the weekend. Obviously, everybody's involved in every sport, because that's, and we all look forward to the weekend. And even the people that work at the weekend are being celebrated. Next slide, please. And so it's been great that these big brands have gone. It's blooming fantastic to see the back of them. It's a shame. It's a shame that people lose jobs, but we'll, as human beings, as society, will sort out more purposeful work than to sell bloody pick and mix from a giant shop on the high street when that belongs to the corner shop. We're going back to more meaningful, more purposeful retail. The public are driving that. Mainly a younger generation that have been brought up on Green Planet and the wonderful Attenborough and now Greta and all of that. And they're learning about sustainability and they're learning about provenance at school, things that my generation never learnt about, and that's why we went off and did Shop Till You Drop. But we can have real faith in the fact that the new generation are closing down basically shops that were shit. Oh, I've sworn. Next slide, please. And towns that are celebrating that new way of looking at things, that independence, that fierce independence, and that people-centered. You look at Frome. If you don't know about Frome, go and visit it. Hebden Bridge and Todmorden. You'll hear more from Pamela Warhurst about Todmorden in a few minutes. And next slide, please. And then just watch out for what we're doing next. We're doing this thing called Remarket, 4 stores in England, in Scotland, Scotland, and Wales, which we're opening this summer, which are giant stores, which will completely replace the BHSs of this world. Hopefully, we're not afraid of trying things. Next slide, please. And that's it. So thanks for listening. And now we're on to a 15-minute presentation from 2 wonderful women entrepreneurs, people who have done so much for society. Nikki Chance Thompson, she's the chief executive of the Peace Hall Halifax, and then after Nikki, Pamela Warhurst CBE. She's the founder of incredible edible Todmorden. And we're going to start off with Nikki. So Nikki's going to speak for 5 and tell us all, Nikki. You can in 5.
Will do. Thank you, Wayne. And what an introduction. So as Wayne said, my name's Nikki and I'm the chief caretaker of the Peace Hall in Halifax. And for those of you that haven't visited the Peace Hall in Halifax, it's a beautiful Georgian cloth hall and it's the last remaining one of its kind in the world. And really the beauty of heritage spaces like the Peace Hall is that if they are kept alive, transformed, have this sense of vibrancy about them, they continue to be a powerful connector, not only to our past, but to our present and the future. They're part of our community identity and DNA. and used wisely and operated well, they can really make some fabulous contributions, not only in terms of economics, but in terms of how we give people a better future, a better way of working that Wayne alluded to. There are ways of better retail, better hospitality, better events that really continue to attract people and reinvent towns and spaces. And Calderdale, just for a bit of context, is a series of small towns and villages, each with a very strong sense of identity that I know Pam will talk about, particularly Todmorden and Hebden Bridge. You know, they are almost like brands in retail terms within themselves. But what we have in common, and what I've learned over the last 16 years that I've lived here, is that this is a very creative, distinctive, resilient and kind borough who always rise to the occasion to support the community, whether it's in terms of flooding or Russian invasions. We have always tried to capture the spirit of the context of this DNA within our activities, which is important for the community in terms of cohesion and well-being. And the Peace Hall has actually been part of Calderdale's DNA since 1779. And though it's been in decline, sadly, it was in decline for a long time, it remained the iconic beacon of the spirit of the borough. There was a major transformation in 2017, which we reopened in the August of 2017 by Calderdale Council and the National Lottery Heritage Fund, a very ambitious project in the middle of austerity, but a very important one nonetheless. And it's been reimagined as a European piazza with 43 independent shops and businesses. And really our role is to serve as the major regeneration catalyst for the area. And it's important to recognise it will always belong to the people of Calderdale, but we really needed to open up this amazing space to the rest of the world for other people to visit and come and experience. And the word that everyone uses when they walk through the doors, or the 4 elaborate gates that we have, is wow. You just don't expect this amazing building to be here. And since reopening in August 2017, I kind of believe you are what you do, not just what you say. You have to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. And so ensuring that you have a range of activities that attract lots of different people is really important, not only for the borough and the region, but for our retailers that trade within here. And since reopening, we've welcomed over 8.5 million people, and that's with a pandemic in between and ceasing operations for over a year and a half. We had to go into total shutdown. But in just under 2.5 years, we contributed £26 million to the local economy. And the return for every pound spent on the Peace Hall is around £6, which in Treasury terms is extraordinary. And the Peace Hall has actually been referred to by Historic England and government as a practical example of levelling up in action. So it's amazing what you can do with these assets if you invest in them and spend time to think about reimagining them carefully. But we'd only just begun this journey before we had to stop. But when we were able to reopen, as we were coming out of restrictions, we welcomed back thousands of people to our courtyard, 48,000 to our late summer concerts, and 60,000 people came to one Christmas market alone, just on a weekend. So footfall and confidence in the town was high, and the community again felt pride in their beloved Peace Hall. And we will continue to do this. But a really important part of the journey as we go forward is to continue to be agile and fleet of foot where the community are concerned, just to ensure that we can serve the community as well as visitors. So long may restrictions be reduced, because there's so much more that we can do for the communities of Calderdale, the borough and the wider region. And I'm really excited about the future and doing some things differently, which the pandemic has kind of set as a context for us all. So that's me in the Peace Hall, hopefully within the 5 minutes, Wayne.
Perfect. And Pam,
yes,
over to you.
Thanks, Wayne. Hi, Nikki. First of all, apologies for looking like Marley's Gold Store, whatever it is. Certainly, I look like that on my screen. So never mind. I don't normally look like this. I want to talk about 2 things, really, which is the power of small actions and the importance of the market town. So in my market town with a bunch of people, we kicked off Incredible Edible. And Incredible Edible was about trying to redefine the spaces of our lives so that we could get to know more people, start to understand new skills, imagine a new local economy, all crazy stuff, not top down, bottom up, but it kind of caught fire. And as a result of people getting on, transforming horrible green spaces into edible beds, and making sure that there was food growing outside the hospital and making sure there were beans outside the police station and so all sorts of crazy things that the community just didn't ask permission, just got on with doing it. And Calderdale, bless them, allowed us to do that. We redefined a form of tourism, which was vegetable tourism, and people came from all over the world. And Todmorden name got on the map. Not that it wasn't a wonderful town before, with a fantastic heritage of people getting on and cracking on in difficult times. But it just captured the imagination of what this market town might be and started to get people thinking about food in a different way. Because from my perspective, food is kind of like the universal language that gets our juices going literally, and helps us do all sorts of things, including creating a local economy. So we've been doing that with 150 places all over the globe, all over the UK, and people all over the world are starting to redefine their spaces, public and private, as edible and making them wonderful and beautiful and worth watching. But what was the next stage? Been fortunate enough to be one of the Town Deal successes, and I chair the board of the local Town Deal. And what we are about is redefining a market town for the 21st century. What we are is a programme, some council, but a lot of community-driven projects that start to redefine the space. So we move towards a net zero town that has a lot of local enterprises, that has a lot more local food being produced in the immediate vicinity, that redefines the spaces in the middle of the town. We've got a fantastic ambition to create a sort of piazza in the middle of the town. We put the money behind that so that we can have events there, top quality events, and also in the middle of our town, some fantastic green resources and natural capital, not greening over rubble like happens far too often, but opening up wonderful spaces to reintroduce food, biodiversity and enjoyment into the heart of our town, not something you do when you're up on the hills. So what Todmorden is all about is starting to just think about the future differently. We're going to have an enterprise centre there. We're talking to local farmers. We want local supply chains. All the stuff that Wayne was talking about, we're trying to do it at a very local level. And if we can show as a proof of concept, which I think we can, that through the incredible edible model of working seriously with grassroots communities and thinking outside the box about what high streets look like, what public squares look like, what enjoyment looks like, what travel to a place looks like, by being brave about some of those and working with those fellow brave people who are getting more people on trains, who are getting more people cycling and walking, who want to set up new businesses, who want to expand the market hall, all these things. By doing that together, we think we could say across the north, we reinvented the market town in the north. This is what we're doing. And we're doing it so it's real, so it's not elitist, so it's inclusive, so it's happy and it's healthy. And folks actually would love to come from Liverpool through to Hull to visit all those fantastic market towns. Each and every one of them has their own identity and are well worth staying over. So that's what we're doing. And it's really exciting. And as you say, the sky's the limit, Wayne. If we don't do it now, we're never going to do it.
Well, that was two fantastically passionate presentations or talks, and I wouldn't expect anything less, because the end result of what you two have achieved, you can see the passion, and it just goes out everywhere, doesn't it? And also, Pam, I'd like to congratulate you on your accent. It's really.
Aren't
we lucky?
Together. Absolutely.
Aren't we lucky?
We'll change it for a minute. Thank you.
Pam, just for people, I mean, there'll be many people on this who have never been to Todmorden. Just explain the changes. I know the changes, but can you explain the changes to somebody who had never been to Todmorden before, of what's happened as a result of the greening and the
Sure.
I love that phrase. Vegetable tourism.
It's quite interesting, Wayne, because it looks different and it feels different and people respond to it differently, because that culture is so important. First of all, what we're doing in Todmorden feels owned by a lot of people in Todmorden who are proud of it. That matters. We haven't flown in somebody internationally to come and design something fancy. We've done it from the grassroots up. And what we've done, obviously, is taken over unloved spaces and turn them into great food sharing places for people to stop and chat and see what grows seasonally and meet people they've never met before. So in the middle of the town, where there was a disused health centre, which was dropped, and then a whole host of hoardings in the last recession were put round it, and it looked absolutely blooming awful. We just painted it green so it started to look better, and said to the council, would you mind taking some of those hoardings down so we can plant some food and green it up? And the council, God bless them, said, yes, we will. So that's what they did. And so we went in there and we created what Mary invented as Pollination Street, which was a place where you could walk through and see apples growing and rhubarb growing and herbs growing and whatever it might be. As a result of that, wonderful woman called Alex came over from West Yorkshire Ambulance Service and planted some local fruit trees for us. And as a result of that, people now picnic there. They get the food from the local market and picnic there. And that's where we have.
And is the market flourishing more? Is it
there's a lot more local stalls on the local market. There's a lot more people interested in supporting local smallholders. You know, we ran a campaign called Every Egg Matters because we wanted people to think about where their egg came from. And if they thought about eggs, they'd think about food and it go beyond it. So yeah, it's had an impact, and it's given
and
a
what
lot
about
of young people.
What about are there many empty shops in Todmorden at the moment? Or
there's still, with respect, too many shops that are. There's nothing wrong with recycling shops. I love them. Why we call them charity shops, I do not understand. It's all about recycling. But we need a better mix. But the bottom line is we are now creating that opportunity for people to feel it's half full, not half empty. And with the 17.5 million that's coming in with the town deal, and with the reinvestment in that sense of purpose at the community level, better recreation, better open spaces, better enterprise, support for businesses, it's all starting to feel a lot different. And quite frankly, the more people that come by train, 4 trains an hour to Manchester, 3 to Leeds, why wouldn't you come by train, wander down, have a drink in the local pubs, go and have a sandwich, eat it in our local park? The whole thing just feels really bouncy, and that's what we need. A human scale settlement that welcomes you. That's what Incredible Edible kicked off, and that's what we're doing with the town deal.
Thank you. And Nikki, what does it feel like around outside of the Peace Hall in terms of, you know, Halifax? How is it responding to what you kicked off, basically?
Well, I'm starting to see in the town centre. The town centre's still got a long way to go, Wayne. I think what we've seen is an exodus of the big brands, if you like, leaving the retail space, because there is a demand for more interesting retail, reinvented retail. But what I'm starting to see are improved coffee bars, food offerings. It's starting to kind of lift the offer in the town centre, but without actually taking away the spirit of the people of Halifax. So a lot of the bars that are open by local people, not by chains, which I think is important. Meandering Bear, Grace and Unity being some of them. I think that we've stalled as a result of the pandemic. And I think that unlike Todmorden and Hebden Bridge, in terms of the town centre redesign, I think there's still a lot more to do. I think there's still more thought that needs to go into what do we want to be. So as an example, the town had quite a high commuter footfall, which of course with more home working has gone, or it's reduced significantly. So how do we now reimagine those buildings, and how do we reuse those buildings in a way that meets the world that we live in now? So I would say that we're an emerging tourism town. We've also got the great Gentleman Jack story here, created by Sally Wainwright with Shibden Hall. We're an emerging tourism town, I would say, that still needs to think more about its profile, its identity. We're at the start of something that we now need to kind of think about, what are we going to be now? Okay, well, that wraps this up. Thanks, Nikki. Thanks, Pam. And now we're over to David Harland, CEO of Eden Projects, and he's going to talk about the town that I was born in, Morecambe. Morning, David.
Morning. Well, it's just afternoon, actually, Wayne. Good to see you. So, really good to be here. God, that was inspiring stuff, actually, wasn't it? Just listening to the guys that have just gone aside. I mean, and what we're trying to do with Morecambe is to make a difference. They were talking about as well, and you know it well, better than me.
Yeah, I mean, tell us where the background is that we all want the Eden Project. I say we. I think there's hardly any people don't want this to happen. We want the Eden Project to open their second big thing. We want it to be open in Morecambe, and you've been working on this for a while, haven't you?
We certainly have, and it will be the second one. I can, we're getting really close because we got planning recently. So I'm hoping someone whizzy is going to make my slides sort of appear here and just talk to those and give you a little sense of exactly where we are. And someone whizzy has done that. And just really briefly, just in case you know people don't know, Eden, our journey started in this sterile and derelict and former clay mine. And I come from Cornwall originally, and it was a place, frankly, that as I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, you were likely to leave. It was certainly not a place to start a career. It was a place to end a career, if anything, although it's fantastically beautiful outside the mining. Because the problem with mines is, and Cornwall has a rich history, is that they leave these scars on the landscape, but also on the communities. And it had become a place a little bit around here without hope. And so that monumental act of transformation, the Eden project that everyone knows today, has been part, if you like, of a revolution that Cornwall has gone through. And I'm not claiming it all for Eden, but it has acted as a catalyst, which is what we sort of want to do up there in Morecambe. If you like numbers, this is for you, but we've been 1 million visitors a year. Remember, we set out to only have 500,000 to 600,000 each year, but 1 million a year come, plus all the school children. But probably the thing that excites us more than anything is that number at the bottom, which is around the local procurement and buying goods and services locally. Is how you really drive economic and social change into an area. We had to actually create the supply chains here. They didn't exist. And in fact, we'd pay more to people if they can demonstrate why it costs more to source locally. And there's just a mention of the National Wildflower Centre. Funny enough, we've just announced something in Morecambe already. So this is where you take areas that may be underloved and so on, and you bring a bit of beauty, a bit of joy, and to remind people actually that biodiversity is all around us. And they act, what wildflowers do as well, is they act as nitrogen fixers and enhance the biodiversity in areas as well. So it's already started actually up there in Morecambe. And I love this. Do you remember Del Boy's van? Yeah, New York, Paris, Peckham, or whatever. The sisterhood of sites, the network of sites that we're doing, has got some big places like Qingdao in China. But it's great to imagine that we can have Cornwall and Morecambe sitting alongside, a site outside Melbourne, a site outside Qingdao, forming part of this sort of connection of sites that are trying to demonstrate our independence on the natural world, but done in a different way, a slightly different way in each place. And Qingdao will open in 23. We've got Dubai Expo open at the moment. I was there just 2 days ago, and it is an incredible story that's having an impact on people. And it's interesting that people often notice the small things. So how the landscape is actually an Emirati landscape playing into a world story has been fun. But also things like Costa Rica. And the reason for mentioning all of these is that they link into what we're trying to do in Morecambe. I get asked so many times, happily actually less now than 4 years ago, why is it that you want to be in Morecambe? And we were just struck from day one that here was a place that existed to, if you like, link the natural world with health and well-being. That's why Morecambe existed. It was a place that you went to, to take the air, to see the beautiful environment that was out there. But it's not without its problems. And, it's the classic British seaside resort. And we started with this narrative about how do we take this place that has, if you like, lost its way slightly and has got some terrible statistics when you look at it in terms of life expectancy and skills. And how do you create something that's actually going to drive, people to really view this as the 21st century seaside resort. And so the site that you're seeing there, if I click the button here, you can see the transformation that we're trying to do. These are the very latest CGIs. This is actually what's got planning. We got planning just over a month ago for this. And you can see it's got a sort of dunescape sort of feel. We're sort of fairly far out here, but you've got the iconic Midland Hotel there in the south. And then everything that isn't sort of on the bit with the biomes, everything there is actually public realm. And we've been really, really careful here to make sure that there's still access to the promenade around the back of it. There's still the public realm at the front. So yes, there's a ticketed element there, but it will really, I hope, act as a sort of change agent there as people come, both locals, regional visitors and tourists. The roadmap, we're still on course to open in some way in 2024. And we're in really detailed discussions at the moment with government because we think that this can act, if you like, as a beacon of levelling up, as a beacon of our national commitment to the environment and having an exemplar of that. But it can also act as a beacon for skills. And you'll see in a second, we've got the 25-year education plan already in place with the local college to actually allow the people in and around Morecambe to develop the skills that they're going to need to actually be part of this new green economy. And I got overly excited there and pressed the button twice. If you haven't seen this, this is just what's going to be going on. We're trying to bring to life what's out there in the bay. It's got elements, if you've been to Eden Cornwall, some of it's the same. It doesn't have a big rainforest, but it's got this thing called the rhythm machine. I don't want to say too much about that here to sort of hold it back, but it's very much a blend of different experiences that people will go home and have not seen the like of before. So there's something new, and there's some stuff that we've also borrowed from the network. We're designing it for 830,000 people a year. You can't help but imagine them all turning up on Morecambe Promenade, can you, at the same time? But that's actually 2,000 to 3,000 max per day coming in. There's fantastic transport links because we want to encourage people off the roads and to use both their feet and to use public transport. So there's a very, very sophisticated thing that we're trying to do with not having car parking on site and working with the local councils. If you like this sort of thing, this is what we're trying to do. We are trying to create something of its place, but that is talked about all over the world. And people already talk to me about Morecambe wherever I go in the UK. They're starting to realise, as I travel internationally as well, when we talk about this place, people get very, very excited about it. And that's because I think people can see that this can really change it can act as a catalyst to change a lot of things in the region and to bring back a little bit of that hope, to bring back some of the good things of the history, but actually to allow Morecambe to look forward. And there's a few things that we're doing already. Most importantly, the 25-year plan, but also social prescription. The Bay Blueprint for Recovery is a fantastic program where people are being prescribed nature for their mental health. And we all know the pandemic has had huge issues on people's mental health, and this is our way with the wildlife trusts and the NHS there to really help people to get better, to not feel so anxious and so on. And so the joy of this for me and for us at Eden is all of this sort of stuff we had to retrofit when we opened Eden in Cornwall. This stuff is being built in right now. It's already happening. And if people want to get involved, there is a couple of email addresses there. The team are really starting to build, and you're going to see a lot of activity over the next year or so. And I hope that gives you a sort of quick whistle-stop tour, Wayne. So you can tell we're a bit excited about it.
Yeah. Well, thanks, David. I mean, everybody involved in the whole region is excited about it. And I think one of the things that I've seen about this is it's changed the narrative. And going back to what I talked about at the beginning about towns thinking that everything was just about shopping, and Morecambe has had a problem, on its seafront for a while, where it was, in big chunks of the seafront, it allowing retail parks to put planning permission in, but now that has gone. What one of the things that you've done, and some other things that we've been involved in as well in Morecambe has done, is it's changed the narrative, and people know. We've been doing a festival there called Vintage by the Sea, which I know you know quite a bit about, David. And
you do.
And what that did is it, like Nikki said about that £6, that 6 times for every pound invested, you get 6 back. That happens when you do culture, and Morecambe has been, when it does cultural things, people spend money in the town. They don't just rock up and go, and so that has now changed the narrative that in Morecambe, that people now look forward to culture of which which you would say that Eden is part of that, and the people want experiences because they know that when people go to a place, they'll wander around the town and spend money in the shops that have been there a long time, and we don't just need to start giving our space over to out of town stuff. So yeah, more power to your elbow, and let's hope 2024 you do get open.
Well, it's about giving the place a bit of soul back, isn't it? So,
yeah.
And I don't know if I'm imagining it. I don't know when you were last there. I was there a month ago for the planning, and two things happened. One was I was walking along the seafront, and you can already see people kind of, coming in behind us. It feels like this is a place that's, whereas 4 years ago they said, "Oh, it'll never happen." Well, now they're saying, "When's it going to happen?" And there was this wonderful moment where we were filming with ITV, and a guy stopped me who'd been on our community conversations, and he said, "Did you get it? Did you get it?" And I said, "Yeah, we got it." And he just said, "Yes," and so.
Well, it looks like I don't know if people can hear me, but it looks like David has disappeared. He's put his arms up and probably knocked the electricity out around him. So we'll wrap it up anyway, because time has come to an end. And now I'm going to pass on to the next session called "Making the North a Home: The Housing Challenge." I don't know who's doing it, but Bab.
No, thanks very much, Wayne, for that dramatic ending of the town session. But Joe, it was great to hear from Wayne, and as well as Nikki, Pam, and David, to hear the passion they all have for their communities and towns. I mean, Nikki is so persuasive that the first time I met her, I'd never heard of the Peace Hall, and within 18 months, I was living a short walk along the canal away from it. And we want the North to be a great place to live for everyone. An investment in housing is central to that ambition, and that's what we're going to look at for the next half an hour or so. I mean, the challenge can be how do we deliver housing at scale and pace, balancing the demands of need, viability, sustainability, and suitability. But we also know that success can bring with it significant and long-lasting rewards. Yeah, I'm joined by a great panel this afternoon, so I'd like to welcome Mike Palin, the Interim Executive Director of Markets, Partners and Places at Homes England, James Thompson, the Chief Executive of MJ Gleeson, Amir Hussain, the Founder and Chief Executive of Yemi Architects, and Tom Sumster, the Head of Private Markets at the session sponsors Phoenix Group. Well, welcome all, and thank you for joining us. If I could jump straight in and start with you, Mike. What are some of the delivery challenges that we are facing across the North at the moment?
I think a number of the challenges are around land supply, and I'm sure others on this group panel will probably say the same. But in terms of delivering housing, the challenges around land supply, but also achieving viability in the places where the planning system is trying to direct developments. There's a continual tension between the need to concentrate housing in places where we would like to see regeneration, and the reality of where people want to live might be different. And therefore, in terms of landing greater delivery, those are challenges that exist right across the North, and they're challenges that we all face into.
Yeah, and James, how do we address that viability point? Is that something that's a constant headache for you?
So listen, I think I certainly would recognise some of those, if you like, challenges around land supply. I'd say part of that is planning for us. I mean, we have a significant number of sites in the pipeline, but we're seeing longer and longer planning timescales. To put that into context, 3 years ago, planning would take us typically 11 months. Today, it's taking us 17 months. The second part of that actually is a viability question. So we're seeing an increasing number of cost requirements coming through changes in regulation, including sort of Part L, Part S, which is adding about £5,000 worth of cost. And if I can just briefly put that into context, our we build 2, 3, 4 bedroom homes, 2-story back garden, front gardens, selling at as low as £100,000. And where viability comes into this is we can't clearly add that onto our sales price. It goes to land value. And the sorts of sites that we are buying are brownfield, areas of deprivation, low housing price. And we're typically paying anywhere between £3,000 and £25,000, maybe £30,000 per plot. Where you've got schemes that we would have been acquiring for £3,000 to £5,000 12 months ago, 24 months ago, with all of this additional cost burden coming through, there is a real risk that many of these important sites that should be brought forward for regeneration do become unviable. And clearly that's one of the things that Homes England, I know, is very, very focused on. So I think it goes to, what's part of the solution here. It is around both, the private sector working very closely with partners such as Homes England, but also local authorities.
And I know you wear several different hats, both and with the day job at the architects, but also as part of Leeds City Region. Where do you see the tensions in the planning system, and how are they best unthreaded?
Well, I think the planning system is a very different picture in different places, but I think there's a really fundamental issue that we have, which is that there are some places where people want to live and developers want to build, and everything sort of pretty much works, and those areas are overheating. And then there's other areas where it's the complete opposite. And we did a bit of an analogy of some of this, and we found that if you look at the highest prices in Leeds city centre for apartment living, it can be at £300 a square foot purchase price. And when you look at the city centre of Bradford, it could actually be as low as £30 a square foot. Now, that disparity means that in those areas where it's very low, developers can't build there. There's very low quality things happening, and we're on a downward spiral. And if we end up simply with social housing in those areas, I think it consolidates that problem. Ultimately, I think it has to come down to a holistic place-making proposition, which creates a place that is multifaceted, engaging, exciting, and offers something that people want to live in. The problem is that there's going to be a shortfall in how that's achieved in the funding capacity of that. And I think that that's where it calls for really big plans from the sort of council and from the regional authorities to have something that's a really cohesive vision. I think there's a lot of investment monies that can be channeled into regeneration schemes if there is a long-term cohesive strategy around how those places can be transformed. And then I think leveraging the sort of social and third sector into that around this sort of place-making narrative to create this destination has to unlock the potential that we have in all of these other areas that are not the overheating ones.
Yeah. And Tom, what's the role of institutional investors, and how can they, perhaps use their influence to solve some of these challenges?
Yeah, sure. So hearing the other panelists absolutely share the view that land supply and viability and also visions coming from local authorities are absolutely key to driving further investment in. We have two challenges at the moment. One being regulation and allowing greater amounts of our funding to be used in this way. It absolutely fits with our Phoenix's core values and institutional typically core values of wanting investments to change community lives, people's lives, and also addressing the net zero agenda. So better homes that are nicer to live in. But equally, it's not just about the homes, and I think Amir touched on this. It's about the infrastructure that sits around the homes, the right hospitals, the right schools, the right transportation links. How are those homes, where does the energy come from? Is it green energy? People are very alert to this now. And when I think about unlocking, institutional capital, we're sort of sitting here now and we've made statements to the government. We have 40 to 50 billion available to invest in homes and infrastructure, provided we get more flexibility to the Solvency II regime. And the ABI undertook a report, even with the existing Solvency II restraints, and it came out with the conclusion that there's 95 billion available to support the levelling up agenda coming out of institutions. So there's no, we're trying to push to the door, but isn't quite open at the moment. We really want to get invested here because it's really important to the way that we invest pension fund capital. The taxpayer today is the pensioner tomorrow, and we have to invest with a social conscience, and we want to. And we want to do that in the North. We want to support the levelling up agenda. So, incredibly important that we get some movement perhaps with the government, but equally that cities provide a vision, provide opportunities, enable the private sector to come in, developers, funders, architects, to work shoulder to shoulder to change the different types of relationships that we've had in the past, to move away from fixed price, long dated contracts, to move into something that's far more flexible, where we put the people as our client, as opposed to perhaps the public sector.
Yeah, and Mike, I saw you nodding along at Tom's points about they're pushing at the door, but the door's not quite open. So, whose job is it to open that door?
There's a role for Homes England, certainly. It's probably worth saying that Homes England is an agent of government designed to deliver policy. So we're technically we don't produce policy, but we have something that's technically called the Policy Delivery Partnership, whereas we spot up issues and report them into the department to inform policy in the future. And one of the challenges, and it reflects what a couple of people have said here, is in identifying the right places to go. Does it have the vision? Does it have a long-term plan? Does it have the right capacity and capability in that place? Therefore, is there something to do? And can you provide surety of decision-making? And those are the places that, those are the criteria that Homes England has been saying to government are essential if we're going to be able to both attract private sector investment, because you want to de-risk that investment by giving surety to the long-term return, while simultaneously you can better place shape and integrate all the things that have just been touched on around transport, hospitals and skills when that plan is in place. So the reason for nodding along was they are the things that we communicate to the department as necessary for policy in the future. Hopefully the levelling up white paper will move us forward in articulating that and actually driving new policy that makes it happen.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things in the levelling up white paper was around brownfield housing, and I think that seemed to be warmly received from different parts. I mean, brownfield housing and addressing that is really important to the north. But how do we make more progress on that? And I suppose how do we make those sites more attractive, to potential residents?
Sorry, was that to me?
Yes,
yes, I wasn't quite sure I missed that bit. I mean, I think that they offer a really, really, really big opportunity. The issue, I think, is that when we look at the brownfield funding, it's really a case of how thinly are we trying to spread that across a greater number of units. And typically, in our experience, in places like Bradford and Huddersfield and so on, these sites do need quite a large amount of subsidy. And I think that, again, it comes back to this point around placemaking and how do we create a mixed community, and how can we create things that maybe are not housing related that can help to unlock the financial opportunity that site sort of has. So if we can get some anchors into there, whether they're skills related anchors or health related anchors or other things, so we essentially approach it so that we enable the community that's surrounding it to be uplifted through that scheme. At the moment, what happens is if we get 100% sort of housing proposition there, it tends to be quite sterile. It doesn't really create its own community. It doesn't really do much to uplift the surrounding community. So I think it has to be a curated mix of different things, which helps to with the viability of it. But then it does need that subsidy to be realistic to help to unlock those potential. But then when we do that, then I think, just like we've seen with places like Saltaire, it can then have a transformative impact, and it can start to uplift the whole of the surrounding area around it.
Yeah. James, what do you see as the role of house builders in delivering that placemaking rather than just delivering sites?
Listen, I come from a slightly different perspective here, and just pick up on a sort of couple of points, because I think we talked about the perception that people don't want to live in developments that are sort of built on brownfield land. Because actually, I have to say that's not my experience, and indeed the majority of our sites are built on brownfield land. And pick up on what Amir was saying, is actually many of these schemes regenerate areas. They're often close to areas of significant sort of urban population. And actually the problem is, in many cases, I just think the lack of development and housing, which when it comes forward, actually does regenerate those areas. The reason I say that is, look, many of these sites I think are smaller in scale, where don't get me wrong, it is important as part of an overall placemaking vision, but they're not of the sort of large scale developments where I think placemaking is particularly important. And again, the reason for raising these is actually, I think if we want to get pace and momentum around housing delivery, and indeed support some of that sort of levelling up agenda, it's how do you, and we were saying it earlier, how do you remove some of that uncertainty? How do you de-risk it? Because many of these sites won't be delivered by the large-scale house builders. It'll be delivered by some of the SMEs and medium-sized builders. And we've got to make it easier for people to come through, because the risks and costs of taking and time involved with taking sites through planning make it increasingly difficult for smaller and mid-sized builders to deliver. And without those, actually, many of the smaller sites will simply stall and will end up being very reliant on the sort of large PLCs to deliver large-scale schemes, which actually I don't think is what is required in many areas across the north, whether it's Bradford or Doncaster or Sheffield.
No, absolutely. And Tom, in terms of the levelling up agenda and perhaps the white paper itself, were there things in there that give you as an investor greater confidence, or is it not really changed the dial much from your perspective?
I think it's a significant move in the spirit of collaborating with the private sector and putting some potential meat behind, a government policy. I think it's been hugely helpful. And whilst I'm agnostic around politicians, I think Michael Gove probably is the right person to drive this agenda through. Having had a dinner with him in December, he's very on top of the subject, and kind of has given a huge number of examples of where he wants to address certain shortfalls up in the north, and that's key to have that support in Cabinet Office. Where we need to go to the next stage is the enablement for people. And again, I mentioned earlier, the Solvency II reforms will be crucial in allowing pension fund money to help fund developers and act as a regeneration agent. And equally, I think the way that we collaborate again with the public sector will be crucial going forwards, so that we can speak with Mike at Homes England, to the National Infrastructure Bank, to Transport for the North, and really understand what their agenda is. How do they see their next 10 to 15 year vision, and how can the public sector play a part? So this is the time. As politicians look forward, it's a vote winner. And as a result, that's great for institutions like ours to get behind the people of this country who want to vote these politicians in, because they are doing something around levelling up, which is absolutely key if we look at the imbalance between the southeast and the rest of the country.
Yeah. And Mike, what role does Homes England have in facilitating those partnerships and conversations?
I think we've got an increasing role. So Homes England was I can say this having been a local authority chief exec, it became a housing supply focused agency. What the white paper has signalled is we're now a regeneration and housing supply focused agency. And that shifts the geography in which we're prioritised to work in. Because as a housing supply agency, it was probably 80% in the southeast. And the Secretary of State said on TV that he wanted to flip that. I'm not quite sure we can do that overnight, but that was what he said he wanted to do. He has used the word dragoon our public sector partners to focus in on places where there is greatest opportunity, whether that be transport, whether that be health, whether that be the National Infrastructure Bank, which very helpfully will be based in Leeds. So it's a shorter journey for me to have the conversation with them. He genuinely wants to see public bodies understanding what each other is doing at a place-based level. And part of Homes England role at the minute is supporting the government in doing that, because we've probably got the best data and mapping facility available in government to allow them to see how things interact with one another. So our role will increase in both being a facilitator of that dragooning, working with combined authorities and other partners in the north, but also providing the information to government and the private sector to say, these are the things going on in these places. This is how we can join them better, join them together better.
Yeah. And I made the mention of the National Infrastructure Bank being in Leeds. How important is that to the north as a whole, that the decision makers are in the region, and in terms of making the conversations much easier, much more frequent, but also, I suppose, changing the perspective and the starting point of some of those conversations?
I think it's absolutely critical. And, just like with Channel 4 coming to the north and being based here, and with BBC being based here. Last week I had a conversation with the Minister for State for Transport, because he happened to be in the new government offices in Wellington Street in Leeds. And, so I think that this interaction is absolutely critical. And I think that, the point that I was making earlier about the fact that, to create the kind of communities and places that we know that we want to have, that will drive inward investment and drive the housing supply into them, there's going to be a shortfall. There needs to be a mechanism that recognises how that is going to be managed. And, there's everybody in this panel has got a role to play within that. But I think the Infrastructure Bank being located here and having those conversations being cited firsthand on some of the really big opportunities. I'm sat in Bradford now, which is, I think, the 6th largest city in the UK. And, with the youngest population, 500,000 people, the opportunities that are here are immense. It's probably the most constrained city by greenbelt land around us. We've got, a massive amount of regeneration opportunities. So when we start looking at sort of where the Infrastructure Bank can start to facilitate practically and sort of fit as part of a mix of things, I think it's a really, really powerful thing.
Yeah. And Tom, what do you see the role of organisations like the National Infrastructure Bank in accelerating delivery of these larger scale projects and ambitions?
Yes, I think it plays a really important part. It's replacing to a certain degree the EIB, which used to come in and create markets with cheap funding to a certain degree, and an ability to take higher risk than perhaps the private sector would want. One of the best examples is the offshore wind farms that 12, 15 years ago, people were concerned it just wasn't profitable at all. It didn't make any sense. And you look at that industry today and it's absolutely thriving. And that was due to EIB, effectively the new National Infrastructure Bank, playing a huge part in their funding at the time. The key here is that they're crowding in, I hope, the private sector, which is they're demonstrating leadership and then allowing the private sector to come in behind them or alongside them. So we have had many discussions with the National Infrastructure Bank. We're very excited that they're in Leeds and that they're up resourcing at the moment. So we can't wait to spend time looking at various investment structures that can help the housing problem here and the broader infrastructure that's required around those communities. But I think, sorry, and just to add to that, I think it will not, I think it, as Mike rightly said, I think Homes England, National Infrastructure Bank, working together as a couple of institutions will be key in promoting areas in which the public sector feel the private sector should be playing a part. And that's not everywhere. So if you think about availability-based projects, I suspect that is better placed in the public sector, but where there are demand-based consumer pay projects, where it really is a private sector opportunity, that's where we would like to make our investments.
Yeah, great. And James, from your perspective, how do you view the private sector, public sector relationship, and is it how you would want it to be?
Listen, I think there are always opportunities to work much closer together. And I have to say, I think where Leeson operates in many of these areas of regeneration and sort of deprivation, I think really important there is a close working-ship between the private and public sector. I just want to sort of pick up on a point that you raised earlier, actually, which is the importance of decision making being outside of London and elsewhere. Because actually, I think it's a really important point. And I, speaking here for someone who, as well as building houses and homes across the north, I'm also a councillor for the City of London. So I just wanted to put that into context with what I'm about to say, which is I think that government should be really bold about moving large parts of the civil service outside of London into parts of the north. And that is about creating jobs, opportunity, moving wealth, increasing housing across the north. And it's also as much as there is just I think it's important in terms of solving, quite frankly, London's challenges around a broken housing market and too great a density of wealth in the economy down south. So I think as part of that levelling up plan, the one thing I would have really like to have seen is much more ambition from government about doing its part to, as I said, relocate significant parts of civil service to the north.
Ambitions are a really interesting word. I mean, do you think that sometimes the north or parts of the north, lack enough ambition?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. That has been the case in the past. I mean, I think that if I go back to the boom time before the last crash, I think there was an extraordinary amount of ambition displayed at that time, really driven by a speculative housing bubble. But certainly where the trajectory seemed to be going was at a new level of aspiration. I think in places that didn't come out of that very well, I think the officers and the councils really took a lot of flack for a lot of things that then went wrong afterwards. And I think that there's been a lot of things under permitted development, the office to resi conversions, that have undermined the market further. So I think that regaining that sort of sense of focus and that sense of opportunity is something that I think needs a lot more. I think it needs a lot more support around what these kinds of places need to do to make that happen. But I think that it's historically been a problem.
Yeah. And Mike, you mentioned before that you were a former chief exec for local authority. Well, one of the finest in the north, St Helens. And then, but how from your different perspectives that you've had there, how do councils that have got so many other priorities and pressures, and we've seen the challenges that councils have faced over the last 10 years or so, embrace the housing need and challenges that there are?
They have to form partnerships, and I was sometimes unpopular in my own sector for saying that, but the idea that local government could resource up with the capacity and capability to do all of the things that their ambition said they wanted to do was, in my view, unrealistic at times, because the specialist nature of the capacity and capability required means there's just no efficiency in holding it in-house. So I think the future for local government in this space is to work in partnership with one another, pool specialist resources, but also work in partnership with the private sector to make sure you've got the capability at hand when you need it to bring forward your plans. And that's what I said earlier around surety of decision making. If you can create vehicles as opposed to try and do everything yourself, then you actually crowd in more investment. And I think Homes England's got a role in that space going forward around working with local partners to make sure that they understand as an intelligent commissioner what it is that they need to be putting in place to crowd in more investment in future years. And I think that's something that we'll be, as Homes England, looking to do through our capacity centre, aligned with the National Infrastructure Bank, because we're very clear we shouldn't be operating in the same space as one another.
Great. And very conscious of time, so if I could just come to each of you with the same question and to be answered in a sentence or two. What's the most important thing that can be done to make sure that we really accelerate progress in this area? And Tom, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's very simple for me. It's we need to see city and local authority visions of the future, which will provide opportunities for the private sector to innovate around that. There's a huge amount of expertise out there that, if we have the plan, the idea over the next 10 to 15 years, we can then think about how we can provide that funding, provide that development expertise, built in the right way, and create homes that change people's lives for the better.
Great. Amir?
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I would just add that I think it has to be based on an asset base that's already there, and really strengthening the things that are working within communities that often get missed. So how do we understand what's already going on, what's working, and how do we use that so that it's actually grounded locally, owned locally, and we create an empowered community that feels motivated and they have that sense of ownership in their place.
Great, thank you. And James?
Be streamlined planning in areas of growth and regeneration, almost sort of presumed consent for development in those areas, and indeed, significant support for building areas of brownfield, areas of deprivation where there are viability challenges.
Thank you. And the final word to Mike.
I think it's something I've already said. I think it's the challenge is to create the right partnerships that provide that surety in the decision making. If you get that right, I think you crowd the other things in.
That's great. And it's interesting, throughout the sessions already this morning at Invest North, how partnerships and local decision making are really coming through as very strong themes, regardless of sector. Well, I appreciate everyone's contributions. Mike, James, Amir, and Tom, thanks very much. And thank you to the Phoenix Group for the support on Invest North as well. Thank you. And we're going to jump now into one of the most successful regeneration and transformational projects in the north of England and in the UK over the last generation, the transformation of Eastlands in Manchester. With the ambitious live events venue Arena Co-op Live under construction, the area will once again be answering Manchester's question of what's next. But I really like our panel, who I'll introduce in a second, to delve into what's made it such a success over several phases, and how it's really, from its foundations, delivered that generation of momentum. So I'm delighted to welcome a great panel for this. Sir Howard Bernstein, the former Chief Executive of Manchester City Council, who's in that role for 20 years. Sarah Tompkins, Marketing and CSR Director at Co-op Live. And Pete Bradshaw, Director of Sustainability at Manchester City Football Club. Thank you all for joining us. So Howard, if I could start with you, I mean, it can be hard sat here in 2022 to remember what Manchester was like in the 1990s, you know, when the Commonwealth Games was first awarded. You know, how did the city find its ambition and then deliver, you know, so fantastically well on that initial vision?
Scary, really, because I can think of the 1970s and 80s. I think you've got to understand the context within which, you know, the whole question of sport and culture and its relationship to regeneration and repositioning a city's economy was undertaken. East Manchester, in a very real sense, whilst it's now rightly acclaimed as a manifestation of Manchester's progressiveness, the 70s and 80s was actually a manifestation or a characterisation of its decline. Manchester was a very strong, productive manufacturing city. East Manchester characterised all of those assets, coal mining, production generally. All of that economic activity disappeared almost overnight, actually. And what was left was a dereliction or a sea of industrial dereliction, which manifested itself in what we now describe as the Etihad campus. So our whole drive at the time to create a place where people want to live, where people want to invest, and where people want to work was developed on the back of a comprehensive plan for regenerating East Manchester, and sport and culture, like it was in other parts of the city, was placed very much at the heart of that. So the failed Olympic bid turned into a successful Commonwealth Games bid, coincided with the Queen's Golden Jubilee, which in turn, we're celebrating 21 years of that, I think, this year, became the opportunity to acquire a site which was very fragmented, to develop the investment capability to actually start to create a new focus for sport and culture, which we believe, coupled with other investments in the area, could actually start that process of change.
Yeah. And Pete, you know, Manchester City, much like Manchester, you know, had a challenging 90s, and were, you know, I suppose the beneficiaries of the Commonwealth Games successful bid, but then, you know, very quickly became partners in the city's ambitions for the area. Just tell us a little bit about, you know, I suppose the role of the football club and in its broader entities in delivering for the city.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Yeah, look, the 90s were challenging in lots and lots of ways, and the football club became very much involved in the whole discussion about the Commonwealth Games and the facilities provided and what the legacy should be thereafter. And what I think was important was a genuine understanding between all of the parties, certainly the City Council, the Football Club, Sport England and others, that really tried to think about, you know, what Manchester would deliver during, you know, the 10 days of a Commonwealth Games, what that actually meant for regenerating this really incredible and important part of the city. But what happened after that? You know, what did we do as a city, not just as a football club, but as a city, at the end of the games, to make sure that local people benefited in the long term, that there was continuing inward investment, and that we looked at every possible opportunity. And the greatest legacy, I think, that came out of that was the partnership and the collaboration that was undertaken between all the parties to make sure that we listened to each other, we worked together, we put a really steady plan. There were no great knee-jerk pieces of work undertaken. There was a strategic plan that thought about how the whole area would develop, how the football club would thrive and progress forward. Very clearly that was important to us, and we had to get that absolutely right. How the city benefited from all of that, and that we made sure that at the centre of that was local people totally engaged with lots and lots of thinking about this long-term planning. So that's what came out of our part of the Commonwealth Games. I was Commonwealth Games and then went to the football club. I wasn't at the club at the time of the games. So it was all this great big opportunity about lots of discussions around the world about putting big sports events on, can regenerate cities, can regenerate districts and areas. And I think what we did in Manchester was really take that on board about what were the regenerative opportunities and the outcomes and the outputs of all of that, and really make those work for us. That only worked through strong leadership, really strong leadership, and that was provided from the City Council, and true and absolute collaboration where every party takes part in that process and understands the journey and the vision. That's I think what happened at the time. It's what's happened ever since and continues today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Sarah, if we jump forward, sort of 15, 20 years and to the Co-op Live, lots of things that Pete just mentioned there about local engagement, planning, legacy, delivering on a vision. It is what you're looking to achieve, and you're well progressed, but near the start of that journey. But I suppose now, it's not a regeneration project; it's an economic development project. So how do you, I suppose, start to deliver on that, and what are the important partnerships and issues that you're wrestling with at the moment?
All the groundwork's been done by these guys. They've set a massive strategy in place for the people of East Manchester, who are super excited about change, which only comes from working with people through regeneration, listening, engaging, and actually taking the fear out of change, so that when new things come, they welcome them with open arms. They want to be involved. They're interested in what jobs are coming. They're interested in who's going to be playing. They're excited to understand that this building is going to bring music to the area as well as sport. So the groundwork has been done. We are literally in the ground, digging in the old colliery, looking at the mine shafts, and now building a 100% electric building on that old site, but respecting the history of that site. And I think partnership is how we work with that community. Partnership is how we work with City Football Group, who have been working with that community for many, many years. And then working with new partners as we go forward, like the Co-op, who really understand the kind of the values of being a good neighbour, ethical trading, delivering of something that's more than, a supermarket. We're delivering more than a music arena in East Manchester. We're delivering a venue that is for everyone, that opens its arms to encourage everybody to enjoy it, both on event days and non-event days. So the canal side improvements, the opportunity that we'll be raising £1 million for charity that we're going back into national and local good causes, is making sure that we're giving back to people who are in the area but not necessarily coming to every gig or working with us. We want as many of the area to enjoy our venue all the time, but we know that it's got to do more than that. It's got to give back every day to the community and be a part of that community. And I think we're just continuing the conversation that was started for the Commonwealth Games that the City Football Group have been having. And we're very proud to be continuing that journey with the residents and enjoying those conversations, really getting under the skin of what's needed now. And you say it isn't regeneration. I think it's always regeneration. If we're always trying to do better for the people of East Manchester, we're always going to be ambitious and trying to drive the best opportunities for everybody in the neighbourhood. And so I don't see it as an economic project. I see it as a continued regeneration project.
No, fair enough, and yes, no, it's a much better way of looking at it. I suppose, Sarah, to Sarah's point about getting people super excited about change, that comes as a result of successful delivery and of delivering on what is said is going to happen. How has Manchester managed to be such a leader in delivery? Compared to not just other UK cities, but European cities as well?
I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think what still characterises Manchester today is strong and effective leadership. What also characterises it is its ability to forge and develop collaborative working relationships, not just with communities, by listening to them in terms of understanding their priorities, but also understanding very specifically what private investors want and need in order to ensure they can make a full and active contribution to the future of the city. And it also involves having realistic, you can be very ambitious, but we also need to be realistic. You know, we never said on day one that the Commonwealth Games would be a panacea for all of Manchester's challenges. We said it would be part of a journey of change. So starting that repositioning process of East Manchester would, in our view, lead to more transport investment, which is what it's done. Our Metrolink system was expanded on the back of it. We addressed what we meant by a more pluralist housing offer to encourage people to live there. We've encouraged the creation of new independent sectors of business so people can work there. And the ANCOs of today, which is characterized by new market creating opportunities, you know, it couldn't be different from the ANCOs of 20, 25 years ago. And therefore, incremental change, which is linked to people investing, people wanting to live, characterized by neighborhoods where people want to live alongside places where people want to invest and visit, is a fundamental part of the continued reimagination of a city. And I think Manchester has done that very effectively and continues to do that in the future.
Yeah. And Pete, you know, two I suppose long-term issues that football has had at the highest level of, you know, it's been overseas investors and stadium-led regeneration projects, you know, over the last 25 years. And there've been plenty of clubs that have struggled with either or both of those. What is it that's made Manchester City's last 20 years be so successful, both, you know, not just on the pitch but off the pitch as well?
I think it's, to a certain extent, it's the things we've been talking about, but I think what we have to understand, it's about us listening and understanding this thing called neighbourhood. What happens to people that live in our city, and particularly in East Manchester? What do they want out of this? What impact would a stadium have on their day-to-day lives? And making sure that we get that, and we listen to people, we do our absolute utmost to minimise the negatives and the disruption that come with a big venue and asking 60,000 people to come every Saturday afternoon or whenever we play football now. But that can cause disruption. It does, and we've been absolutely upfront and honest with our community. We have regular meetings with our neighbours and residents associations, and to Howard's point earlier, we're celebrating the 22nd year actually of those meetings this next month. So we've had this constant and regular and absolutely honest dialogue with people that live in the area, and that includes businesses as well, and understanding the challenges that people face. And that's been highlighted over the last 2 years through the pandemic, when we've actually gone out and outreach to people that have been isolated and challenged in all sorts of ways, and done our utmost to be a part of the community and not just a concrete structure that sits there with a fence around it and people don't touch it. That's not what Manchester City is about. It's not what the City Council's about, actually, and it's not what any of the partners on that Etihad campus are about. It's always looking outwardly. How do we touch and relate to the day-to-day lives of people in our city? That's what's been important. That's what true regeneration's about, and it's actually what makes a difference. And I think by working like that, understanding the challenges, but actually, I'll pick up Sarah's point as well, understanding the incredible energy and enthusiasms of people in our community, particularly young people who want more, who want to be involved, who want to be part of this journey. and how do we make sure those things happen? So for us, through City and the community, they were absolutely part of this. This is our outreach team, 100 odd people that go out into 400 schools across the city, work with community groups day and night, 365 days a year. How do we change things? How do we help, not impose change, but help people change in the way that they as a neighbourhood and as communities want to change? That's the difference. It's actually understanding that the city, has got lots of concrete and glass towers in it, and has got lots of big physical developments going on. But fundamentally, it has to be about the people that live in our city, that come and work in our city, that want to invest in the city and do more of that. And I think that's what I like to think. That's what we as Manchester City have done. We've done it right from our founding days back in 1880, when that's what we were founded to do. It's core to our values, and we've in the present ownership, that's just expanded and remains fundamentally central to every single thing we do as a football club. But I have to reiterate, it only works because we collaborate, we work in partnership in every possible sense. And the big thing I think that is different in Manchester than is different in lots of places is this thing called social agency, where it's really about making sure that people have a chance to be involved, to engage, to sell their ideas and thoughts, and make sure that we're doing it with people and not to people. And that I think is what's different about us as a football club, us as a venue, and everybody that's involved in the Etihad campus, and I actually think the wider city, if I may.
And Sarah, I think many of those things that Pete's talked about there are common at the COP, and that sense of sort of neighbourhood and their values. I'd like to touch on the sustainability part of the arena's development, because I know that's central, and it is such an important theme for the next generation. So just tell us what you're achieving at COP Live, and why you've put that right at the centre of the development.
Because it matters. You've got to do it. We absolutely have to change the narrative on how we create buildings, how we do business. And if we don't address that within the next 10 years, then it's too late. And that comes straight from our boss, straight from America, in terms of the direction of travel. We have to find ways of doing a building that is planet friendly. And, we're building the building with solar on the roof, we're looking at rainwater collection, we're looking at, heat source pumps, we're driving as much energy efficiency around the building as we can, and we will also be procuring green energy, very renewable energy as much as possible. It doesn't stop there. We've then got to think about the food waste, the packaging of our food, how we operate our building to ensure it's as carbon neutral as possible, and sharing lots of learning from Pete on this in terms of what he's been doing at the club for some time, making sure we've got local suppliers, reducing the transport miles of everything that we do. Even in the build process, we're thinking about everything from collapsible board ducting to offsite prefabrication to reduce transport journeys. Everything is being thought through. Recycled jackets for our construction workers. You've got to look at every single thing to ensure you're doing the right thing and making those choices. They're more expensive choices. They are often not cost effective. They don't help our bottom line, but they absolutely have to be the right choices for us to ensure we are driving a building that is caring for the planet and the next generation. And then we've got to work with our fans. Our fans have to also get to the venue sustainably. And that is a big part of our next conversation, really, is how do we ensure that our fans and our artists, and how we work with the industry to change the game a little bit on how we can do live music, live events, touring in a more sustainable way. And that's a vision that as a leader, Tim and our bosses are very clear on. This is the direction of travel we have to deliver. So our Climate Pledge Arena, our sister arena in Seattle, was the first carbon neutral venue in the world, and we hope to be equally as challenging on ourselves in terms of opening a carbon neutral building at the point of when we open in Manchester, and be the first in Europe to deliver that kind of credential. It's massively important to us. Hopefully it comes through the passion of everything that we do, whether that's how we construct and who we contract to work with us, to how we think through our operational delivery, into our partnerships with Co-op and other brands that we're associating with. So yeah, I can't stress it enough, but I think it's something we all need to do and all work harder and stronger and better at, because we're running out of time.
Yeah, and Pete, why is sustainability important to Manchester City?
It's important to City because it's fundamentally right for every part of what we do, from our social agenda to our environmental credentials, and actually to the success of the business. We to the points that Sarah's made, we have a local procurement policy that actually is still driven by best value. We have a 70% local employment policy that really looks at every level of employment and training and pathways and learning and development and so on. So the whole social agenda is absolutely vital to make sure that this works too. If we don't do this right, then investors in football, investors in our club, and an investor can be somebody that buys a shirt, it can be somebody that buys a ticket for a match, it can be a big sponsor, a big name sponsor. Investors come in all shapes and sizes, and people will vote with their feet about which concert arena they go to in future, which football team they support, where they shop, and which shirt they buy. So everything we're doing has to sort of take into account, what do people expect to see? How do they want us as a football club to behave, us as a city to develop and move forward? Make sure that we're thinking about wellness and clean air and reducing congestion where we can, and all those things that are physically really important, and making that difference to people's lives. If we get those things right, we help this city, we improve the general wellness of people that live and work and play here, and also we get positive and future investment in our business. And we've seen that with big sponsors like Xylem, who've come in as a big water sponsor, and recently Masdar in terms of energy, and others as well. And we want to see new partners coming forward. We want to collaborate further with like-minded organisations that get this ecosystem that is really, really important to us. So it's vital to us that that's how we behave. It's absolutely essential to the bottom line as well. And those things don't have to be exclusive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Howard, how important is it when the city has conversations internationally, and whether that's with investors or other potential stakeholders, that there are organisations like Manchester City and Cope Live being leaders and early adopters of something that everyone's now so focused on?
It hates me to say it, but you've got to include Man United as well in that type of analysis. Manchester now enjoys a critical acclaim about being a world-class international city. It wasn't always like that, I have to say. And in those terms, a city which is demonstrating its capability to meet global challenges is going to be one that is taken more seriously than those that are not able to meet those global challenges. So Manchester has long been associated with a place for being very cohesive, being multicultural, first at many things in meeting societal and economic challenges over the centuries. Manchester has got to continue to occupy that space, demonstrate that there is an ability for cities to respond effectively to different economic cycles, where different economic sectors have changed the dynamics, and more particularly a city which is at the forefront of meeting global challenges as well, whether that's transition to zero carbon, whether that's also about some of the other stuff that we read in the newspapers, unfortunately, at the present time. Manchester has always been in that space. It's absolutely right that it continues to be so in the future.
No, great. And the pace of change, for Manchester and its success over 20 years has set the bar, really high for everybody. So, what's next for
you got
either?
cities never stand still. As soon as cities started standing still, they walk backwards. So places have continued to evolve. They've got to adapt their offer and their business base to meeting future challenges. We have to do a lot more. Unfortunately, we have to rely on government to help us too much, in my view, about how we tackle some of the real problems that too many of our communities still suffer within the city, which is linked to inequalities, whether that's around access to work, whether that's around population health. The list is endless, but it's very familiar to you and to your audiences. We've just got to continue to evolve, continue to attract private investment, develop the partnerships which are going to be increasingly important in moving the city forward, and at the same time retain that creative endeavour, that creative capability to continue to shape markets where people want to live, work and invest in.
Joe, I think you might have condensed our 6 hours of content into 60 seconds this hour. That was fantastic. But Pete, for you, what's next at Manchester City from your perspective?
The next is to keep being successful.
Championship, I hope, lad.
No, keep being successful, keep winning, but doing that responsibly. I think that underpins everything we do. But actually not being afraid of innovation and invention and where that takes us, whether that's in football or generally around the campus in the city, and talking to organisations that can help us with the future of materials we might use in our buildings. And we've been heavily involved in graphene, for example, in the city. We want to see more things like that happen. We're looking at AI and a whole range of things. But where does that take us? And I think there's an incredible future out there that we need to grasp with both hands and be very enthusiastic about it. We've got to be responsible about it. But yeah, I think that's where this takes us. It's about keep being successful, keep our eyes on people, that more important than everything, and do everything we can to be a credibly and truly sustainable organisation and group of organisations that work for the common good and make sure that our businesses are successful and continually evolving. The things that have already been said, really. But that's where I think we are as an organisation too, and make sure that we positively and properly represent our fans, our community, and our future.
Great. And Sarah, I think we know the answer because you're still early in your journey, but what's next for Co-op Live? And I suppose just how excited should we all be at the moment?
Oh, well, what's next is Manchester get ready, because the best music venue is about to land in the city, and hopefully we make Mancunians proud. We offer 120 of world-class events on the doorstep for Mancunians to enjoy. And I think in the current climate, when the world is pretty tough on everybody's mental health and, getting through every day, one disaster after another, it feels like, just somewhere people can relax, enjoy, go and have a good night out and spend some quality time with their mates and get some rebalance back in their lives. So for us, we're about to press play. Obviously, we're still a building site, but this summer we'll probably start going live with Artist Snacks announcing, so people can start buying tickets and start getting excited for what the future holds in terms of the opportunities to visit and see and experience live music like no other. And I think we've all been starved of it for too long with COVID. So bring it on. We are ready and can't wait to showcase the world and open this stage up to the rest of the world and really bring the world to Manchester, and hopefully the Mancunians will have a great night out and enjoy it and feel super proud of what we're bringing.
It sounds fantastic and definitely something for us all to look forward to. Thank you very much, Sir Howard, Peter, and Sarah for your contributions. It's great to understand more about what's been behind the success of Eastlands, and also what lies ahead for East Manchester and for the north of England more widely. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we've reached our final session within our place pillar at Invest North, and we'd like to just bring you for a few minutes or to tell you about one of the most exciting developments, I think, in the North right now, which is the UK's first city-based wellbeing resort, Therme Manchester. And to tell us all about it, I'd like to hand over to Therme Group UK's Chief Development Officer, Richard Land.
Hi everybody, delighted to be here today to talk about Therme Manchester, particularly in the context of the North and Greater Manchester and placemaking. I've got some slides that I'll share with you, so I'll just pull these up and start the presentation. Let's wait for the technology to work. There we go. Right, so in terms, our approach to placemaking, as with many other people, is to really define what the vision is and how that vision then manifests, and we can deliver that in a concept, and then obviously focus on the community. No place exists without the community, and then I'll give you a few nuggets of information around Therme Manchester. So our vision is based on the fundamental belief that well-being should be for everyone, and it's a necessity, not a luxury. It should encompass all areas of life and is a fundamental human right. We believe that the facilities we develop, should have a positive impact in their urban environments, and it's something that we strive very hard to achieve and do. So in terms of the concept and how we go about delivering the vision, we create unique immersive environments focused on the traditions of thermal bathing, but bringing that forward into the 21st century, really to bring technology, nature and culture together. As you can see here, bathing isn't alien to us, but we believe we're doing it in a unique way that has never been seen before, and will be very exciting, particularly for the UK. So how do we do that? Let me move myself over here. We have a number of zones that allow us to cater for everybody. So we have adult areas that include very exciting water slides and wave pools, next generation water park. We have bathing areas for the adults, which are adult only areas, and health and well-being spa elements, and throughout that we kind of weave art and culture and gardens, and we carry out fitness programming and holistic therapies, etc. So as you go and come to the facility, you'll explore and discover these experiences that are sort of again woven throughout, and you'll find them throughout really and manifest in different areas. Perhaps maybe not the active and fun, that's more sort of in the family area, but yeah, lots of excitement to be found. Well, lots of excitement, but also well-being to be found, of course. And then, of course, we can't be talking about bathing without talking about our main commodity being water. Put a huge focus to create the best quality water with naturally clear and purified. We have 0 chlorine, but you can't have water without nature, and so we bring in these amazing, bring in nature and technology to create these amazing environments that you see here, and to create these urban oases within the city centres. We don't just bring nature into the building, we use nature to fundamentally drive the design principles of our buildings to create truly iconic landmark developments. We want every facility that we build to be that picture postcard image as you go to a city, and places that the Sydney Harbour Bridge, let's say. And of course art and culture is not typical for leisure and wellness, but we believe it's fundamental to our offering. We've got a very strong art team that works with internationally recognized artists, together with local artists, and the artists really like the concept of Thermes, because it brings their art into the facilities and allows people to feel to immerse themselves in it without necessarily appreciating the artwork, but that it's more about the experience. We also use art to reach out to the communities, and we do a number of activations in the areas we go, again to support that placemaking in the regions. Okay, then on to community benefits. So we touch on and bring a number of benefits to the communities. I won't read them all out, but the headers of course are pretty significant in terms of economic, social and cultural value, population health and environmental. I think maybe particularly to mention is the population health, where we really focus on bringing positive behavioral change to improve people's mental and physical health, and we think that brings huge benefits to society in creating a healthier communities where we go, and obviously that brings benefits to the healthcare systems, and we with those we stand side by side to support them. Again, so back to our vision, well-being for all. I think this just kind of shows how people will come to our facilities, and it can come in, people can come as singles or groups or couples or families. It can be children with parents or grandparents or everyone, and really there's truly something for everyone, and we cater for all of those types in the facilities. How we reach out to the communities and engage, we partner very much. So you can see here we've the Therme Manchester Marathon that we were fortunate to sponsor last year in October, and will be again in next month. We also have did a project with the schools, with partnering with our Therme Art, partnering with Manchester International Festival, as you can see here. So we went to a number of schools, did breathing exercises, and the children did these emojis that then we'll use those tiles. Sorry, let me go this way. You can see there. We'll print those onto tiles and bring them into the facilities to let the children feel part of the development as it evolves. A number of other partnering examples here. Just to mention Scottish Youth Hockey in the UK, but also a number of activations in Canada. So really, all of that, we feel our facilities become an important form of social infrastructure. So bringing and bring far more than what may be traditional forms of social infrastructure. We bring all of those elements to one building, and we believe we help cities and communities become healthier and stronger and more resilient. So on to Therme Manchester. So first to mention Therme Manchester is our first step in the UK's vision, 1990 vision, where 90% of the population can reach a Therme within a 90-minute travel time. And so to this end, we've announced Therme Scotland towards the end of last year, and we're working on a number of other projects in Wales and Southern England. So we think we're well on track to achieve this over the years to come. So Therme Manchester, a few stats here for you to read at your leisure. It's a big site, it sits there next to Palazzo, the former Barton Square. Very excited with the new metro link that comes in, that to promote sustainable access, together with the Bridgewater Canal at the rear, where we can encourage people to cycle and walk to the facility, with that nice peaceful corridor to the rear. So we'll really be looking at that. We hope to get 1.5 million visitors in the first year, and we'll build on that as the business matures. We touched on economic and social impact earlier. Here you can see some fairly strong numbers. We believe 4.5 billion of economic impact during construction and first 50 years of operation, 600 direct jobs. In terms of social impact, again, another big number, 3.5 billion over 50 years of operation. Not to mention days saved in hospital admissions. I mentioned that population health earlier. And of course, Manchester is part of part of the first step for the UK is also important in our global strategy as well. And just to mention that all of the concepts that I've talked through earlier in this presentation, we feed through to wherever we go. Is very much we can't exist without the placemaking in the community. So vital importance to us. So that is actually my last slide. I'll stop sharing that and just say thank you very much. I hope you've learned a little bit more about us, about Therme Manchester, and what we'll be bringing to the region. All right, thank you very much for your time. Bye.
No, and thanks, Richard. I think Therme Manchester will be a great addition to the north and to the health and wellbeing sector. That wraps things up for the place pillar. I think it's been really interesting across the 7 sessions how much sort of commonality there's been. So much talk of partnerships, collaboration, and social agency. And as Richard mentioned in his presentation, putting economic impact and social impact side by side. And that's also been woven through, whether we're talking about transport connectivity, the challenges of housing delivery at scale and pace, or the regeneration of East Manchester over the last 20 or 25 years. I think also what's come through very clearly is the ambition of the North and the desire to lead, whether that's on net zero placemaking or that post-pandemic community that we're all so focused upon. I hope you're feeling better informed and inspired from what you've heard. We've got a short break on the blue stage now before the War for Talent pillar starts at 1:45, so in about 10 minutes time. And our innovation pillar will start on the pink stage just a little bit after that at 2 p.m. So I hope you're able to stay around and join one or both of those as we go through the afternoon. In the meantime, do check out our exhibitors before we get going on the stages, or pop in to see them as the afternoon progresses. Thank you very much.